On the day we were supposed to leave for our honeymoon, he handed me divorce papers. "I'm taking my whole family with me. If you don't like it, we'll get divorced," he said. "Fine, but I'm still single, you know," I thought, screaming in my mind as he stood there looking shocked. "Take that. My name is Emma. I'm 35 years old and work at a real estate company. I enjoy my job and find it fulfilling. I'm lucky to have supportive colleagues, both senior and junior. But in my personal life, I don't have any hobbies and I've never had a boyfriend." I secretly felt anxious because my friends were all getting married by the time they turned 30. There were only a few of us still single. My juniors at work were also leaving the company one by one, and each time it felt like a stab in the chest. That's when I met Brian through a friend's introduction. He was 2 years younger and had a smile that made me feel protective. He didn't talk much and always listened to my opinions. He always put my thoughts first when making decisions. Since I had never been with a man before, I quickly fell for Brian's personality. Our relationship developed smoothly. When I brought up marriage, Ryan simply said, "Then let's get married." Marriage involves making many decisions. Planning the wedding, the honeymoon, and finding a new home to live in together. It's a major, once-in-a-lifetime event, so I wanted us to make these decisions together. But no matter what we talked about, Brian would always go along with my opinion. He never expressed his own thoughts, just agreeing with whatever I suggested. Ryan's passive nature started to feel unreliable to me, and I began to feel dissatisfied with him. Another thing that troubled me was my relationship with my mother-in-law. Her personality was completely different from Brian's easygoing nature. She doesn't listen to my opinions and always imposes her own ideas. "When you get married, Emma, of course you'll quit your job and focus on taking care of the house, right? At your age, if you don't hurry, you won't be able to have children. Brian is working hard, so as a woman, you should focus on the family. It's the wife's duty to support her husband," she said as soon as I went to greet her. She clings to these old-fashioned ideas. The truth is, I earn more money than Brian. He doesn't seem to mind and has even told his parents about it, but his mother doesn't seem to like it. A woman who earns more than a man doesn't have any charm. Maybe you can't do any household chores, can you? A wife should be able to cook, do laundry, clean, and take care of her husband's health. Can you do that? My mother-in-law said, looking down on me. If it were Brian saying that, it would be one thing, but it feels different coming from my mother-in-law. It's not something to brag about, but I can handle all household chores since I've lived alone for a long time. I have no intention of quitting my job after marriage, and I want to prioritize myself as much as Brian. That's what I thought, but when my mother-in-law criticized me, Brian didn't defend me. Instead, he nodded along with her statements. Because of that, I started feeling uneasy about relying on Brian for the rest of my life. Well, Brian is younger than me, so maybe he'll become more reliable in the future. If this marriage doesn't work out, I might never get married in my life. Anxiety and desires clash in my mind, swirling around in endless conflict. However, time doesn't wait, even when I'm troubled. There are so many decisions to make for the wedding, choosing the venue, planning the honeymoon, applying for time off from work, and more. The to-do list keeps getting longer. With a sense of unease, I spend busy days preparing for both work and marriage. One day, I discussed with Brian, considering our work schedules, we can only take a long vacation at this time. Is it okay to have our honeymoon during this period? Yeah, I think it's fine. Both Brian and I have similar quiet periods at work. If we want to take a long vacation, this is the only timing we have. The problem is the wedding. The venue I've always dreamed of is so popular that it's booked for over a year in advance. In that case, what about going on the honeymoon before the wedding? I looked it up, and it seems some people do that. If we have the wedding first, it will be another 2 years before we can go on the trip. If you are okay with that, Emma, then I'm fine with it too. I thought Brian wouldn't object but to agree so readily. At this rate, it seems like all my opinions will be accepted. For the honeymoon destination, the menu for the wedding, and the decoration of the venue, I do have a desire for Brian to express his own opinions a little. But it's better than being opposed, so whenever I found a moment, I continued to progress with the preparations for the honeymoon and the wedding. In the end, we decided to go to Europe for the honeymoon. I debated until the last minute between Hawaii and Europe. Hawaii is close by, and I'm sure there will be another opportunity to go there, so I chose to take a trip around Italy and France, experiencing the picturesque streets and delicious cuisine. I also wanted to explore the stylish accessories and maybe buy some commemorative tableware since it's the start of a new life. After considering various schedules and destinations, I completed the application about a month before the tour. By that time, I was completely excited. After all, it's my first overseas trip. It's impossible not to feel thrilled. My mind became filled with everything related to Europe, from buying the necessary items for the trip to planning our activities at the destination. Because of that, any dissatisfaction I had with Brian had completely disappeared. As the honeymoon approached 1 week away, Brian suddenly brought up a conversation. "Emma, I have a favor to ask." A favor that's unusual. I wonder what it could be. It's rare for Brian to ask me for something. Could it be about the trip? Did he find a place he wants to visit? "What is it? What's wrong?" I asked, filled with anticipation, and he innocently made the request. "I want to go to St. Taylor when we're in Paris. Mom really wants to go there." "What? My mother-in-law? Wait a minute, what do you mean?" I couldn't catch up with this sudden situation, but Brian replied as if it were obvious. "Huh? Since everyone is going, we'll all be together even during the trip, right?" "What do you mean by everyone? It's a honeymoon, so it's obvious that it's just me and you, the two of us going." "But my mom thinks it's normal for the whole family to go." "First of all, I only made reservations for 2 people, you and me, Brian. The tour deadline was 7 days ago, so today is the last day to register. Regardless of whether we go together or not, I only booked for 2 people, so there's no way we can go. If you ask the travel agency, they can figure something out." As I was dumbfounded by his statement, the intercom in the house rang. On the intercom screen, I saw the figure of my in-laws. Without caring about my surprise, my in-laws entered the house carrying a large number of bags. Ignoring my objections, my mother-in-law's eyes sparkled as she announced, "I thought I'd leave the luggage here since we are leaving soon. I'm so excited." Then Brian said, "Just leave the luggage here," and started leading my in-laws into the room without my consent. "Wait a minute," I tried to stop him in a hurry, but my mother-in-law stared at me sharply. "Oh, what is it, Emma? I hope you're not suddenly saying I don't want to go together now." I didn't agree to go together in the first place," I immediately retorted, but my mother-in-law paid no attention, saying, "You heard it just now, didn't you? But Brian always thought we would go together with you, right?" In response to my mother-in-law's flattering question, Brian replied with a simple "yeah." Taking advantage of his affirmation, my mother-in-law began to deny me. "It's normal for the husband's parents to go on the honeymoon. Though you have such common sense, I hope you won't have any unpleasant experiences during the trip, being with you. Since it's a special honeymoon, we want to make good memories, right? I'll make sure to drill common sense into you during this week before we go on the trip." It's supposed to be a special honeymoon. Drilling common sense into me, it felt like everything was being ruined. I clearly felt my blood boiling. "Mother-in-law, this is a honeymoon, you know? Normally it's supposed to be just the husband and wife going, right?" I desperately held my ground. If I continued to listen to my mother-in-law's side, it would affect the future. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. However, my mother-in-law stubbornly refused to compromise. Not only that, she started to deny me. "The husband's parents are supposed to go on the honeymoon together. It's just common sense. I can't believe you dislike being with us. I thought we would become a family, but our common sense is different. You don't like me, and nothing seems to match. How sad." As if she had been hurt herself, my mother-in-law lowered her eyebrows in an artificial manner. The end of her words, "how sad," contained an underlying smirk. I was convinced that she was deliberately trying to trap me. That's how certain I was. Even Brian, without questioning, began to blame me based on my mother-in-law's words. "Emma, what the hell? They're my parents. It's okay to go on a honeymoon together, isn't it?" "It's impossible. We've already made the reservations for 2 people. Besides, I've never heard of families accompanying a honeymoon trip," I declared, and Brian shouted angrily, as if picking a fight. "I never thought you hated my parents so much, Emma. That's it. Just leave for today." He looked at me as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. As Brian spoke, a wicked smile formed on my mother-in-law's face. Why does he always take his mother's side without listening to his spouse's opinion, especially at a time like this? I wanted him to support my views. Before I could even react to his words, I found myself pushed out to the entrance. Just before the door closed, I caught a glimpse of my mother-in-law's smug expression. I was left outside, unable to do anything but stand there. Why am I being treated like the bad guy? Why does everything have to be ruined, including this precious trip? Frustration and sadness overwhelmed me, and tears began to flow. A few hours later, I received a message from Brian. I want you to see if it's still possible for them to join the tour. If not, we'll cancel this trip and apply for a tour where all 4 of us can go. Please think rationally. If you reconsider, we can figure it out properly. I don't think I'm in the wrong, so I have no reason to apologize or respond. Brian must be angry too, because there was no contact after that message. Time passed, and the day of our honeymoon departure finally arrived. I couldn't imagine enjoying it in this state, but we had been preparing for this honeymoon for a month. I couldn't refuse. As I prepared to leave the house with a heavy heart, the intercom rang. Brian had come to pick me up. We hadn't seen each other since that incident, so I didn't know what kind of face to put on. The fact that he came to pick me up meant that he still intended to go on the trip. But he didn't have a single suitcase with him. Instead, he handed me a divorce paper. After hurting my parents, you still intended to go on this trip, didn't you? I'm taking my entire family on this honeymoon. If you don't like it, let's get a divorce. My mom said it would be better that way. Saying that, he thrust the divorce paper in front of me. In that moment, I finally realized what kind of person he was. I thought he would listen to my opinions and prioritize me, that he was kind. But that wasn't the case. This man is just someone without his own opinions, and he prioritizes his family over me. That's Brian. As I came to that realization, I felt my feelings for him cooling down. Even if I were to marry him, I couldn't see myself overcoming the many challenges that awaited us in the future and becoming a family with that mother-in-law. It was an impossible scenario. Determined, I pointed at the divorce paper in front of me and said, "Sure, but I'm still single, you know." "Huh?" Brian exclaimed, clearly surprised by my words. "Single? What do you mean?" "Weren't you listening? We talked about going on the honeymoon but delaying the registration until the day of the ceremony. I made sure to get your permission, Brian. You know that, didn't you forget? The marriage certificate is still in the drawer, and you even said, if you were fine with it, Emma, then I'm fine too." "That's right. Divorce or not, we're not even married yet. There's no problem with going on the honeymoon with my maiden name." Perhaps he remembered my words as Brian's expression suddenly changed. But immediately, he turned red and raised his voice in frustration. "Are you out of your mind to give up on marriage just because of a honeymoon? Get a grip," I responded, matching Brian's intensity with my own strong voice. "This is the result of me being rational. I've been so desperate to get married that I couldn't see reality clearly. I don't think I can be happy marrying someone who doesn't listen to the opinions of their future spouse and doesn't support them. I'd rather stay single for life. Thanks for making me think that way." I keenly felt that this saying was true. "Hey, Emma, let's calm down and start over from scratch, okay?" He looked like he was about to cry. His pleading voice trembled. "But I won't be fooled anymore. I will break free from this guy." Without realizing it, I found myself shouting loudly at Brian. "If you're so eager for a family trip, why don't you go with your family of 3? But you'll have to plan everything from tour reservations to the itinerary by yourself. After always depending on others, it's time you experience the challenges yourself. If you think you can handle it, go ahead, you indecisive man," I said as I pulled the marriage certificate from the drawer and tore it to shreds in front of Brian. He was stunned by the sudden turn of events, his mouth hanging open. My determination overwhelmed him completely. "Now, do you understand how serious I am? I won't accept a future in the dark. It's over between us. Why don't you hurry back to your beloved mommy and cry to her, you mama's boy?" With that, I left Brian dumbfounded, slamming the front door behind me. Given his demeanor, it wouldn't be surprising if he did go cry to his mother. Afterward, I called the tour company to cancel our reservations. Since it was a same-day cancellation, we were hit with a 100% cancellation fee. I billed Brian for the entire amount because he was the reason our honeymoon fell apart. It felt like the right consequence. Later on, Brian blamed me for the failed marriage and spread rumors about it among our friends and family. However, it seemed no one sympathized with him. Instead, his actions labeled him as an unconventional mama's boy, and he was disliked by many. When I told my parents about the divorce, they were initially surprised but quickly accepted it. "Marriage isn't the only path to happiness. Your happiness is what matters, Emma," my mother reassured me. I couldn't have been more grateful for her support. As a side note, since then, I've discovered a new passion for traveling. I didn't want to waste the vacation time, so I embarked on my first solo trip. International travel was a bit challenging at first, but I found peace exploring historic cities I'd always dreamed of visiting. Being alone is surprisingly enjoyable, I realized during my historical adventure. Thanks to that trip, I've embraced solo travel fully. Whenever I have time off, I'm already planning my next overseas journey. I've started a life where I'm not defined solely by marriage, but by my own experiences and happiness.
I've been holding this story inside for years, but recent events have made me realize I need to share it. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through something similar. It's long, so I'll break it into parts. Growing up, everything in my life revolved around reputation. My parents were both teachers at Riverside Prep, one of those prestigious private schools where politicians and CEOs send their kids. Mom taught AP English, Dad was head of the mathematics department, and their status at the school was everything to them. "Cindy, remember who you are," Mom would say whenever I did anything slightly out of line. "You're a teacher's daughter. People are always watching." I can't count how many times I heard that phrase growing up. It was like a mantra in our house, right up there with "straight A's aren't an achievement, they're an expectation, and your behavior reflects on all of us." I was their only child, their perfect little project. They monitored everything, my grades, my friends, my clothes, even my posture at dinner parties. Looking back, I should have seen the signs of how controlling they were, but when you're raised in that environment, it all seems normal. Things really started looking up in my junior year of high school, when I began dating James Mitchell. His father owned half the real estate in our city's downtown, and his mother was on the school board. My parents were ecstatic. "This is exactly the kind of connection we've been hoping for," Mom told me one night while I was doing homework. "The Mitchells are such a respectable family. And James is so focused on his future." Dad nodded along, adding, "Just think, Cindy. If things work out, you could have such a wonderful life ahead of you." James and I actually got along great at first. He was smart, funny, and seemed to understand the pressure of having parents with high expectations. We'd spend hours talking about our plans for the future. He wanted to go into commercial real estate like his father, and I was planning to become a financial analyst. "We could be such a power couple," he'd say, half joking, but not really. The real estate mogul and his brilliant financial advisor wife. Our parents loved to get together for dinner, planning our futures, while we sat there, nodding and smiling. Everything was perfect on the surface. Just like they wanted it. I graduated as valedictorian, got accepted into Winston College's prestigious business program, and started my freshman year with James at the same school. Our parents couldn't have been prouder. They'd achieved their goal, their daughter was on track for the perfect life they'd planned. College life started out exactly as planned. James and I both threw ourselves into our studies at Winston, and everything felt like it was falling perfectly into place. My business analytics professors praised my work, and I was maintaining that perfect GPA my parents expected. James and I spent most of our free time together, and our relationship grew more serious. By the middle of sophomore year, we'd become intimate. It felt like a natural progression. We'd been dating for almost 3 years at that point, and we talked about marriage after graduation like it was a foregone conclusion. I was 19, in love, and thought I had it all figured out. Then came the morning sickness. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just stress or a stomach bug. But after 2 weeks of running to the bathroom between classes, I couldn't deny it anymore. I bought 3 different pregnancy tests from a pharmacy across town, not wanting to risk running into anyone I knew. I still remember sitting on my dorm room floor, staring at those little pink lines. Positive. All 3 of them. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely text James to come over. "You're what?" His face went pale when I told him. No. This can't be happening. Not now." "I know it's not ideal timing," I said, trying to stay calm. "But we can figure this out together. We've always talked about having a family eventually." "Eventually?" James cut me off. "Yeah, after college, after I've taken over Dad's business, after we're married and established. Not now. Do you know what this would do to my future? I felt like I'd been slapped. What about our future? There's only one solution here, he said, pacing my small dorm room. You need to get an abortion. We can't have a baby now. It would ruin everything. No, I said firmly. I won't do that. This is our child. My parents will cut me off if they find out about this, he interrupted. Everything I've worked for will be gone. You can't do this to me, Cindy. But someone had already done it to me. While James and I were arguing, my phone started buzzing. My mom's name flashed on the screen. Come home, now. Her voice was ice cold. We need to discuss this situation. I felt sick. How did you? James called his parents. They called us. Come home immediately or we'll come get you ourselves. The drive home was the longest 2 hours of my life. When I walked through my parents' front door, I found both sets of parents waiting for me. The look of disgust on their faces made me want to disappear. How dare you? My mother's voice shook with rage. How dare you disgrace us like this? You stupid, stupid girl, my father spat out. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation at school? Mrs. Mitchell was crying dramatically. Our James has such a bright future ahead of him. He can't be tied down with a baby now. I'll raise the baby myself, I said, wrapping my arms protectively around my stomach. I don't expect anything from James or any of you. A single mother? My mother laughed bitterly. Our daughter, a single mother? Is that what we raised? A little whore who spreads her legs and ruins her life. We won't allow it, my father declared. We will not have our reputation destroyed by your irresponsible behavior. Reputation? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is your grandchild we're talking about. No, Mrs. Mitchell said firmly. This is a mistake that needs to be corrected. James has his whole life ahead of him. This thing would ruin everything. The discussion went on for hours. It wasn't really a discussion though, it was more like a coordinated attack. Think about your future, Cindy, my father kept saying. How do you plan to support a child? Where will you live? We won't continue paying for your education if you insist on keeping it, my mother added. Is that what you want? To throw away your entire future? I sat there on our living room couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless hours studying for tests and planning my perfect future. I could get a job, take a break from school. And live where? My mother's voice was sharp. Certainly not here. We won't have you bringing that kind of shame into our home. Maybe one of my aunts. I started, but my voice trailed off. Dad was an only child, and Mom's sisters both lived overseas. I had nowhere to go. James sat silently through most of it, staring at the floor. His parents did all the talking for him. James has an internship lined up with Morgan and Reed Investments next summer, his father kept saying. Do you want to ruin that for him? Is that how little you care about his future? They wore me down, bit by bit. Every plan I suggested was shot down. Every possibility I brought up was crushed. No job would pay enough. No apartment would be affordable. No future would be possible. Finally, my mother drove me to the clinic herself. The doctor was professional, but concerned during the initial exam. I need to inform you, she said quietly, looking directly at me, that this procedure could impact your ability to conceive in the future. There are potential risks. We've discussed all that, my mother interrupted. We've made our decision. The doctor looked at me. Ms. Thompson, I need to hear from you. Do you understand the risks? I couldn't speak. I just nodded. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I recovered physically, returned to Winston for the spring semester, and threw myself into my studies. James tried to talk to me once, mumbling something about how it was for the best, but I walked away mid-sentence. We never spoke again. During spring break, instead of going home, I got a job as a barista at a coffee shop near campus. I picked up shifts during every holiday after that. My parents didn't object, they seemed relieved not to have me around. As long as I maintained my GPA and didn't cause any more problems, they were content to keep paying my tuition. "We're glad you finally came to your senses," my mother said during one of our brief phone calls. Everything worked out for the best. But nothing felt like the best. Nothing felt right anymore. I went through the motions, got my assignments done, kept my perfect grades. But something inside me had broken, and I knew it would never be the same. After graduation, I landed a position as a financial analyst at Morgan & Reed Investments. Ironic, considering it was one of the firms James had been so desperate to intern with. But I'd earned my spot on my own merit, graduating summa cum laude and impressing during my interviews. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I buried myself in work, analyzing market trends and building financial models. My apartment became my sanctuary, no judgment, no expectations beyond my own. Then came the night of the company's annual holiday gala. I almost didn't go, but my team leader insisted. "You can't keep hiding behind those spreadsheets forever, Cindy," she said. That's where I met David. He was one of the firm's partners, but not the stuffy, arrogant type I'd expected. He was discussing basketball with the custodial staff when I first saw him, genuinely interested in their March Madness predictions. "I hope I'm not interrupting a serious strategic meeting," I joked, needing to get his signature on some reports. He looked up with the warmest smile I'd ever seen. "Actually, Jose here was just explaining why my bracket is going to be a complete disaster this year." We started dating a month later. David was different from anyone I'd ever known, genuine, kind, and completely unconcerned with status or appearances. When he proposed a year later, it was over takeout Chinese food in my tiny apartment. "I don't need a big wedding," I told him. "Just us." And that's what we did. A simple ceremony at the courthouse, with his sister and best friend as witnesses. No elaborate dresses, no society photographers, no concerned whispers about reputation. Just love and honesty. I didn't tell my parents. By then, we were down to exchanging brief birthday and Christmas texts. They didn't ask about my life, and I didn't volunteer information. Then, 3 years into our marriage, my mother called. "Your father's sick," she said without preamble. "He needs surgery. You should come." David squeezed my hand as we pulled up to my childhood home. It looked exactly the same, perfectly manicured lawn, pristine white trim, not a single thing out of place. My mother's eyes widened when she saw David step out of the car. "Who's this?" "My husband," I said simply. "We've been married for 3 years. What followed was a fascinating transformation. First came the hurt accusations about being excluded from the wedding. But as soon as David mentioned his position as executive director, and they realized I was now a senior financial analyst, their tone completely changed. "Oh, darling, we've missed you so much," my mother gushed, as if the last several years of silence hadn't happened. "You must come visit more often." Then came the real reason for the call. Dad needed expensive surgery, and their insurance wouldn't cover all of it. Could I help? After all, I was doing so well now. I agreed to help with the medical bills. Maybe it was weakness, maybe it was forgiveness, or maybe I just wanted to prove I'd succeeded despite everything. Dad looked genuinely grateful, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe the past could stay in the past. After Dad's recovery, David and I started talking about having a family of our own. We both wanted children, and the timing felt right. But month after month, nothing happened. At first, we tried not to worry. "These things take time," David would say, staying positive. But after a year of disappointment, we decided to see a fertility specialist. Dr. Martinez was kind but thorough. She ran various tests and took a detailed medical history. Then came the question I'd been dreading. "Have you ever had any pregnancies or terminations?" My throat went dry. David didn't know about what had happened in college. I'd never found the right time to tell him. But sitting there in that sterile office, the truth had to come out. Yes, I whispered. An abortion. When I was 19. Dr. Martinez nodded professionally, making notes. After reviewing all the test results, she delivered the news that shattered my world. The termination procedure you had resulted in some complications, she explained gently. Combined with the scarring that developed afterward, I'm afraid your chances of conceiving are virtually non-existent. I felt the room spin. All those years ago, the doctor at the clinic had warned about risks, but my mother had dismissed them. Now here I was, paying the price for a choice that had never really been mine. That evening, I had to tell David everything. We sat on our back porch, the same spot where we usually planned our future, and I confessed it all, the pregnancy in college, my parents' reaction, the coerced abortion. I'm so sorry, I sobbed. I should have told you sooner. I understand if this changes things. David pulled me into his arms, cutting off my words. Hey, look at me, he said softly. Nothing could change how I feel about you. Nothing. We sat in silence for a while, his arms around me, before he spoke again. You know, there are other ways to build a family. We could look into adoption. Give a home to a child who needs one. His words were like a lifeline. We spent that night researching adoption agencies and requirements, making plans for a different kind of future than we'd imagined, but one filled with just as much love. Meanwhile, my newly rekindled relationship with my parents took on an uncomfortable pattern. Every visit included the same question, so, when are you going to give us grandchildren? I'd deflect, change the subject, talk about work or Dad's recovery, anything to avoid the truth. They'd already proven they cared more about appearances than their own grandchild once before. I wasn't about to give them another chance to judge my choices. Even though Dad had fully recovered, I kept sending them money every month. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was guilt, or maybe some part of me still hoped that financial success would finally earn their genuine approval. The Thanksgiving invitation came as a surprise. My parents rarely hosted holidays anymore, claiming they were too exhausting. But this year, my mother insisted we come. We're having a few friends over, she said. Nothing fancy, just some colleagues from school and their families. I should have known better. When we arrived, the house was packed with at least 30 people, all pillars of the local education community, all part of my parents' carefully curated social circle. The evening started predictably enough. Everyone commented on how successful I'd become, how impressive David's position was, how proud my parents must be. The same shallow conversations I'd grown up with. Then came the moment that changed everything. My mother cornered us by the dessert table, wine glass in hand, speaking just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. You know, Cindy, Mrs. Peterson was just showing me pictures of her new grandson. Absolutely adorable. When are you and David going to give us grandchildren? Everyone else our age is already enjoying grandparenthood. Before I could deflect, David squeezed my hand and answered honestly. Actually, we're looking into adoption. We've already started the application process. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through several shades of red before she practically shouted, "Adoption? Have you lost your mind?" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. My mother seized the audience's attention like the experienced teacher she was. Everyone, can you believe this? My daughter, who could give us perfectly good grandchildren of her own, wants to adopt instead. Mom, please, I hissed. This isn't the time or place. Dad stormed over from his position by the fireplace. What's this nonsense about adoption? Are you trying to embarrass us again? Do you have any idea what kind of background these children come from? Drug addicts, criminals, mentally ill parents, is that what you want to bring into this family? You're making a scene, I said firmly. This is a private matter. But the damage was done. My parents' friends, loosened by holiday drinks and encouraged by my parents' reaction, started chiming in. You really should have your own children, dear, Mrs. Peterson offered. You never know what you're getting with adopted kids. My cousin's friend adopted, another guest added. Terrible mistake. The child had all sorts of problems. Think about your family legacy, someone else called out. My parents stood there nodding along, clearly pleased that their social circle was backing them up. The same smug expressions they'd worn all those years ago, when they'd had others gang up on me about my pregnancy. Something inside me snapped. You want to know why we're adopting? My voice cut through the murmur of judgmental whispers. You really want to know? Fine, I'll tell you all exactly why. The room went deadly quiet. I could see the warning in my mother's eyes, but I was done protecting their reputation. I can't have children because of complications from an abortion I had when I was 19. An abortion that you, both of you, forced me to have because you were more concerned about what the neighbors would think than about your own daughter and grandchild. Someone gasped. Mrs. Peterson's wine glass froze halfway to her mouth. You threatened to kick me out, cut off my education, leave me with nothing unless I took care of the problem, I continued, my voice shaking but clear. The doctor warned there could be complications, but Mom, you remember what you said? We've made our decision. Not me, we. You and Dad and the Mitchells, all deciding what would happen to my body, my baby, my future. I turned to address the shocked faces around the room. So yes, we're adopting. Because thanks to my parents' desperate need to maintain their precious reputation, that's my only option for having a family now. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother did something I should have expected but still caught me off guard. She went on the attack. How dare you, she shrieked. How dare you come into my home and tell such vicious lies? You ungrateful girl. She turned to her guests, hands trembling. She's lying. She's always been troubled, always trying to blame others for her mistakes. She got herself into trouble and had an abortion without even telling us until after the fact. We would never. Are you serious? I cut her off. You're really going to stand there and lie? In front of all these people? David, show them the medical records. My husband pulled out his phone where we'd saved copies of my old medical files, documentation I'd gotten from the clinic for our fertility specialist. But before he could pull them up, my mother completely lost it. Get out, she screamed. Get out of my house right now. You've ruined everything, again. Just like you always do. Get out. As David and I walked to the car, I could hear my mother trying to do damage control inside, her voice high and panicked as she offered more drinks to her guests. My father didn't say a word, he just stood there, silent as always when it really mattered. The drive home was quiet. David held my hand the entire way, not pushing me to talk, just being there. When we finally got home, I went straight to my laptop and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to my parents' account. It took exactly 2 months for my mother to call. I was in the middle of reviewing our home study paperwork for the adoption agency when her name appeared on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer. But part of me wanted to hear what she could possibly have to say after Thanksgiving. The Petersons withdrew their son from the school, she began without even a hello. Mrs. Chin isn't inviting me to her book club anymore. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? I actually laughed. After everything, she was still only concerned about reputation. Your father and I deserve compensation for this damage you've caused, she continued. The monthly support you were providing barely covers the social costs we're incurring. People are treating us differently at work. We've had to explain things, to make excuses. Excuses? I cut in. You mean lies? Like the lies you told at Thanksgiving? Or the lies you've been telling yourselves all these years about what you did to me? We did what was best for you. And this is how you repay us? By spreading vicious stories and then cutting us off financially? What was best for me? My voice was steady now, calmer than I'd ever been when speaking to her. Do you know what David and I did last week? We met with a therapist who specializes in helping adoptive parents deal with infertility grief. She helped me understand something important. What you did wasn't just about the abortion. It was about control. It's always been about control. Don't you dare. The money was just another form of control, I continued. As long as I was paying you, you felt like you still had power over me. Well, that's done now. I'm done. You ungrateful little. I'm blocking your number after this call, I said. Both of yours. David and I are in the final stages of our adoption home study. In a few months, we'll hopefully be matched with a child who needs a home. A child who will never have to worry about family reputation being more important than their well-being. A child who will be loved unconditionally. You're making a huge mistake, she hissed. When you realize that, don't come crawling back. I ended the call mid-sentence and blocked both their numbers immediately. Then I went back to my adoption paperwork with a lighter heart than I'd had in years. That was 6 months ago. Today, David and I are finishing up the nursery for the baby girl we'll be welcoming next month. Her birth mother chose us specifically because of our story. She wanted her daughter to be raised by parents who understood that love is more important than appearances. Sometimes I think about my parents, about what they're missing out on. But then I remember, they made their choice a long time ago. They chose reputation over love, appearances over family. I'm choosing differently. My daughter will grow up knowing she is wanted, cherished, and accepted exactly as she is. No conditions. No expectations. No concern for what the neighbors might think. Final edit, our daughter is home with us now. She's perfect. I remember my childhood as a time of contrasts. While most kids complained about their parents working too much, I had to listen to my mom's daily litany about how she hated her job. Every evening was the same. She'd come home from the accounting firm, throw her bag on the kitchen counter, and start venting. Amanda, you won't believe what my boss said today, she'd begin, barely taking off her coat. He had the nerve to question my quarterly reports. Me, I'd been doing this job for 15 years. I was only 10 at the time, but even then, I could see how different my parents were. Dad, who managed a retail chain, would just shake his head and keep eating his dinner. He was always the practical one. Sarah, he'd say to Mom, using his calm voice that somehow made her even more agitated, if you hate it so much, find another job. Another job? She'd scoff. I don't want another job, Mark. I want no job. I want to be home, living the life I deserve. Dad would usually chuckle at this point, which never failed to send Mom into a fresh spiral of complaints. You think it's funny? You think it's amusing that your wife is miserable? I learned to tune out these conversations, focusing instead on whatever book I was reading or homework I had to finish. But everything changed when we got that call about Uncle Jerry. I still remember that evening clearly. Dad was unusually quiet during dinner, and Mom was going through her usual routine of complaints when he finally interrupted her. Jerry died, he said simply, putting down his fork. Mom stopped mid-sentence. Your Uncle Jerry? Was there, did he leave anything? Dad sighed heavily. He left his estate to his nephews. I'm one of them. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. How much? $200,000. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my mother's face transform, the perpetual frown lines smoothed out, her eyes widened, and a smile I'd never seen before spread across her face. Mark, she whispered, reaching across the table to grab his hand, do you know what this means? We could buy that vacation house I've been talking about, or... No, Dad cut her off firmly. Remember all those times you said you wanted to be free? Well, here's our chance. I'm going to start my own business. A business? Mom's voice rose an octave. But Mark. A courier company, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. I'd been researching it for years. With this capital, we could make it work. You could quit your job and help me run it. We'd be our own bosses. Mom's face went through a series of expressions, disappointment, calculation, and finally, resignation mixed with hope. Fine, she said eventually. But I get to be the accountant. And when we start making money, I want nice things, Mark. Real nice things. Dad smiled and squeezed her hand. Deal. The first 3 years were tough. Dad worked crazy hours getting his courier company off the ground, while Mom handled the books. I spent a lot of time at the office after school, watching them build something from nothing. Despite the long hours, there was an energy in the air, a sense of possibility that made even the difficult days feel worthwhile. Then, almost exactly 3 years in, everything changed. The business started turning real profit, and suddenly we were living a completely different life. We moved from our modest house to a fancy new place in the expensive part of town. Dad bought 2 Mercedes for himself and Mom. But the biggest change wasn't in our surroundings, it was in my mother. "I'm done," she announced one morning over breakfast. "Mark, I'm quitting the company. I don't want to work anymore." Dad just nodded, like he'd been expecting this. "Okay, honey. We can hire another accountant." I nearly choked on my cereal. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Mom smiled, already scrolling through her phone. "Oh look, Melissa just got back from Paris. I should call her." Melissa was one of Mom's new friends, all wealthy businesswomen who spent their days shopping and planning their next vacation. Her old friends, the ones who'd been around when we were normal, started disappearing from her life one by one. While Mom was reinventing herself, I started spending more time with Dad at the office. I tried to learn about the business, thinking maybe I'd take over someday, but my heart wasn't in it. "Dad," I said one afternoon, watching him review delivery routes, "what if I told you I don't want to run the company when I grow up? I think I want to be a dentist." Instead of looking disappointed, his face lit up. "Really? Tell me more about that." So I did. I told him about the biology classes I loved, about how fascinating I found dental procedures, about my dream of having my own practice someday. He listened to everything, asking questions, and showing genuine interest. Meanwhile, Mom was barely home anymore. She was always off somewhere, Aspen, Cabo, the Maldives, with her new friends. I lost count of how many times I asked to go with her. "Mom, can I come on your trip to Europe next month?" I asked one day, watching her pack another new suitcase. She didn't even look up. "Oh honey, no. These trips are my time to get away from, well, everything. When you're older, you'll realize how exhausting family life can be." I wanted to point out that she didn't actually participate in family life anymore, she was too busy recovering from it. But I just walked away. What was the point? The mother who used to help me with homework and make chocolate chip pancakes on Sundays was gone, replaced by this stranger who cared more about her designer handbags than her daughter. High school graduation came and went, and before I knew it, I was packing my bags for dental school in another state. Dad helped me move into my dorm, setting up my room with the same careful attention he gave to everything in his life. Mom didn't come to help me move in. She was in the Bahamas with her friends, celebrating someone's new yacht. Every Sunday at 7 p.m., I'd call home. Dad would appear on screen immediately, eager to hear about my classes, my friends, my life. He'd lean in close to the camera, hanging on every word about dental procedures and anatomy lessons. Mom, when she bothered to join the calls, would hover in the background, usually scrolling through her phone. It became our routine. Sometimes Mom wouldn't show up at all, and those were actually my favorite calls, just Dad and me, talking about everything and nothing. Then came the call that changed everything. "Amanda," Dad's voice was different that Sunday. "I need to tell you something." I knew from his tone that whatever was coming wasn't good. But nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. "It's cancer. And it's aggressive." The world tilted on its axis. "What? No, that's impossible. You're healthy, you." 6 months, maybe less, he cut me off gently. "I'm selling the company. Neither you nor your mother could run it, and I want everything settled before." He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Those 6 months were a blur. I tried to split my time between school and home, watching helplessly as my father, my rock, my best friend, withered away before my eyes. He sold the company quickly, thank God, so at least he didn't have to worry about that in his final weeks. Mom fluttered around during his illness, playing the part of the devoted wife whenever anyone was watching. But I caught the calculating look she'd give his medication schedule, the way she'd check his business papers when she thought no one was looking. A month after selling the company, Dad slipped away quietly in his sleep. I was holding his hand when it happened. Mom was at a spa. The funeral was a production worthy of Broadway. Mom sobbed dramatically, clutching at the arms of her friends, barely able to stand. She looked the perfect picture of a grieving widow in her designer black dress and tastefully subtle makeup. But the moment the last guest left, it was like someone had flipped a switch. She straightened up, wiped her eyes, and walked to the mirror to fix her mascara. "Well," she said, suddenly businesslike, "that's done. Now we need to talk about the money." I stared at her, unable to process the transformation. "Mom, Dad just died." "I know, honey, and it's terrible," she said, not sounding terrible at all. "But life goes on. And just think what we could do with the money from the company sale. I've had my eye on this gorgeous villa in Spain." Then there was the reading of the will. The notary's office was cold and sterile, nothing like Dad's warm presence. Mom sat next to me in a black designer dress, different from the funeral one, of course, tapping her manicured nails against her leather handbag. Mr. Peterson, Dad's longtime lawyer and friend, cleared his throat and began reading. Being of sound mind, his voice droned on with the legal preliminaries until he got to the meat of it. "The family house is to be divided equally between my wife, Sarah Thompson, and my daughter, Amanda Thompson." Mom's tapping stopped. "Furthermore, I have established a trust fund for Amanda's continued education in dentistry, covering all expenses until the completion of her degree." I could feel Mom's tension building beside me. "The remaining assets, including proceeds from the sale of the business, are to be divided as follows: 60% to my daughter, Amanda Thompson, and 40% to my wife, Sarah Thompson." The tapping resumed, faster now, almost violent. "This is ridiculous," Mom burst out before Mr. Peterson could continue. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Peterson said quietly. Mark was very clear about his wishes. Mom turned to me, her face a mask of calculated sympathy. "Amanda, honey, you have to see how unfair this is. Your education is already being paid for, and you'll make plenty of money once you're a dentist. I'm your mother, I need this money to maintain my lifestyle. Maybe try spending less?" The words came out before I could stop them. Her face transformed instantly, the sympathetic mask dropping away to reveal raw fury. "How dare you? After everything I've sacrificed for you?" "What exactly have you sacrificed, Mom? You haven't worked in years. You've been on permanent vacation while Dad built everything we have. I don't have to listen to this." She stood up, gathering her designer purse and jacket. "When you decide to stop being selfish and ungrateful, you know where to find me." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the diplomas on Mr. Peterson's wall. "Your father knew this might happen," Mr. Peterson said gently. "He wanted to make sure you were taken care of." Days turned into weeks. No calls, no texts, no emails. The silence was deafening, but also strangely peaceful. I threw myself into my studies, trying to make Dad proud, trying not to think about Mom's reaction or what it said about her, about us. "She'll get over it," I told myself as I reviewed dental anatomy charts late at night. "She'll calm down eventually." But deep down, I knew something had broken in that notary's office, something that had been cracking for years. And unlike the broken bones and damaged teeth I was learning to fix in school, this wasn't something that could be mended with study or skill or science. One day I was taking a study break, mindlessly scrolling through social media, when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at: Mom, tanned and glowing, wrapped in the arms of a man who couldn't be more than 35. The caption beneath the photo stopped my heart. Finally married to my soulmate. Newlyweds, love wins. My phone slipped from my numb fingers. Married? Without telling me? I tried calling her immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the right numbers. Straight to voicemail, of course. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of them together kept playing in my head, along with 1,000 questions. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I packed a small bag and caught the first flight home. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it after the funeral, Dad's rosebushes still perfectly trimmed, his favorite chair visible through the living room window. The only difference was the shiny red Porsche in the driveway that definitely hadn't been there before. Mom opened the door wearing a silk robe I'd never seen before. Her surprised expression quickly turned to anger. "Amanda, what are you doing here?" Her voice was ice cold. "I saw your post," I managed to say. "You got married?" "No one invited you here," she snapped, but before she could close the door, a man appeared behind her, the one from the photo. Up close, he looked even younger. "Babe, who is it?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Nobody important," Mom replied. "Just my daughter who doesn't know how to call before showing up." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Your daughter who didn't even know you got married?" "My personal life is none of your business," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "None of my... Mom, Dad's only been gone 3 months." She laughed then, a harsh sound that held no humor. "Oh, sweetie, Brad and I have known each other for years. Why do you think I took all those solo vacations? Those trips were boring. Brad made them very interesting, didn't you, darling?" He smirked, pulling her closer. I felt sick. "How could you do this to Dad?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Your father was boring," she shot back. "Always work, work, work. Brad knows how to have fun. Now, I suggest you leave before I call the police. This is my house now, and you're not welcome here." "This is half my house," I reminded her. "Dad left it to both of us." "Get out," she screamed, her composed facade cracking. "Get out of my house. Go back to your precious studies and your perfect little life that your father bought you." I backed away, tears blurring my vision. The last thing I saw before the door slammed was Brad pulling Mom into a kiss, both of them laughing. I made it to my rental car before the sobs came. All those trips, all those times she said she needed breaks from the family. How long had she been living this double life? How long had she been betraying Dad, betraying all of us? Another month has passed. I was in the middle of a dental anatomy class when my phone buzzed. Mrs. Jenkins, our old neighbor who'd lived next door for 15 years, was calling. Odd, she never called. "Amanda, honey," her voice was hesitant. "I thought you should know, there are moving trucks at your house. Your mother is selling it." The words didn't make sense at first. "That's impossible. The house is half mine." "Well, there's a sold sign in the yard, and they're clearing everything out." My hands were shaking as I dialed Mom's number, expecting the usual silence. To my surprise, she answered on the first ring. Well, if it isn't my studious daughter." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Mom, what's this about selling the house?" She laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, that. Yes, Brad and I got a fantastic price for it. We're moving to Mexico, the weather's so much better there." "You can't sell the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's half mine. Dad left it to both of us." "Funny thing about that," she said, sounding almost gleeful. "It turns out it's pretty easy to forge a signature. Just a few practice runs, and voila. The house is sold." The world tilted sideways. You forged my signature?" "Mom, that's fraud. That's a crime." "Oh please," she scoffed. "If you hadn't been so selfish with your father's money, I wouldn't have had to do this. Brad and I deserve to enjoy life." Speaking of which, I just bought him the most gorgeous Jaguar. He's so happy with it. He's happy with your money, Mom. That's all he cares about. You little brat, she spat. You're just jealous, because I have a gorgeous young husband who adores me, while you're all alone with your boring books and your little dental tools. What do you know about love? I know Dad loved you, I said quietly. He loved you for 30 years, and this is how you repay him? Your father? She laughed again, harsher this time. Your precious father, who left you more money than me. Who treated me like I was some kind of trophy wife. Well, now I have a real trophy, a young, handsome husband who knows how to have fun. And guess what? We don't care about your American laws in Mexico. We don't care about you, or your inheritance, or anything else. We're going to live the life I deserve. Mom, please. Face it, Amanda. You're just a sad, lonely little girl who's jealous of her mother's happiness. When was the last time you even had a date? Too busy playing with teeth to have a real life, aren't you? Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there in the empty classroom, my phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence. My mother had just admitted to committing fraud. She had stolen my inheritance, my home, everything I had left of Dad. And she was proud of it. Life has a funny way of moving forward, with or without you. In the years following Mom's disappearance to Mexico, I finished dental school, completed my residency, and started working at a respected clinic. Dad's inheritance helped me buy a beautiful apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and I was building the life I'd always dreamed of. I thought about Mom sometimes, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep. I wondered if she was happy with her choices, if her young husband was worth destroying her family for. But mostly, I tried not to think about her at all. Then one ordinary Tuesday evening, as I was unwinding after a long day at the clinic, my doorbell rang. I wasn't prepared for what I saw through the peephole. There stood my mother, but not the perfectly coiffed, designer-clad woman I remembered. This woman was haggard, wearing wrinkled clothes that had seen better days. Her once immaculate hair was graying at the roots, and her expensive makeup was nowhere to be seen. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Amanda, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Baby, please. What are you doing here? My voice came out harder than I expected. She pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes darting around desperately. I need your help, Brad, she choked back a sob. He took everything. Everything? I couldn't help the hint of satisfaction in my voice. All the money, the house money, what was left of the inheritance. He spent it all on gambling and parties in Mexico. And then, she wrapped her arms around herself. Then he met some 20-year-old at a club. They ran off together. Took the Jaguar, took what little money was left. I stood there, watching her cry, feeling nothing but satisfaction. I used my last dollars to fly back here, she continued. Amanda, I know I made mistakes, but I'm your mother. Let me stay here with you, please. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, surprising us both. Stay here? With me? Why are you laughing? Her face darkened. This isn't funny. I have nowhere else to go. Maybe you should have thought about that before you forged my signature and stole my house, I said, my laughter dying away. I was wrong, she wailed, falling onto my couch. I know that now. I'm sorry. Please, Amanda, I'm your mother. No, I said quietly. You stopped being my mother the day Dad died. Maybe even before that. I want you to leave. She shot to her feet, tears instantly replaced by rage. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you. Everything you've done to me, I corrected. Now get out. You can't do this to me, she screamed, mascara running down her cheeks. I'll tell everyone what a horrible daughter you are. I'll tell them how you left your poor mother homeless. What will your fancy doctor friends think about that? As my mother's threats echoed through my apartment, I calmly pulled out my phone. Sometimes the best weapons aren't weapons at all, they're just the truth, preserved at the right moment. Before you continue with your threats, I said quietly, there's something you should hear. I pressed play, and her own voice filled the room, younger, more confident, dripping with that familiar mockery from years ago. Oh please. If you hadn't been so selfish with your father's money, I wouldn't have had to do this. It turns out it's pretty easy to forge a signature. Just a few practice runs, and voila. The house is sold. The color drained from my mother's face as she listened to her past self confess to fraud. Her legs gave out, and she sank back onto my couch. You recorded that call? Dad taught me to always be prepared, I said, stopping the playback. He also taught me about consequences, something you never seem to understand. You wouldn't, she whispered, but the uncertainty in her voice was clear. Wouldn't I? Fraud is a federal crime, Mom. Forging documents for financial gain? That's years in prison. I'm sure the police would be very interested in this recording. She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not manipulation, not calculation, genuine fear. I'll leave, she said quickly. I'll go. Just, don't. Don't what? Turn you in? Like you were just threatening to turn everyone against me? I leaned closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that door, and you're never going to contact me again. No calls, no visits, no messages through friends. If I ever hear from you again, this recording goes straight to the FBI. She stood on shaky legs, clutching her worn purse to her chest. At the door, she turned back one last time. Amanda, I'm still your mother. No, I said softly. You're just a woman who gave birth to me. My mother died a long time ago, probably around the time she started cheating on my father at those resorts. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, then hurried out the door. I stood there for a long time after she left, listening to the silence of my apartment. Then I walked to my bedroom and pulled out an old photo album, one of the few things I'd managed to save before she sold the house. There was a picture of us from when I was little, Mom, Dad, and me at the beach, all smiling, all happy. I touched Dad's face gently. I miss you, I whispered. Then I closed the album and put it away. I don't know what happened to my mother after that day. I don't know if she found somewhere to live, if she ever rebuilt her life, if she ever truly regretted what she'd done. Sometimes people ask about her, and I simply say we're not in touch. The truth is, I don't want to know. The woman in that photo album, the mother who once loved me, is gone. The stranger who showed up at my door that day? She's not my problem anymore. My name is Sandra, and I'm the second child in a family of retail workers. My parents were always busy, rushing between work and various development courses they attended with my older brother. As for me? Well, I was the afterthought. From my earliest memories, it was clear who the star of our family show was. My brother got everything first, the newest toys, the latest gadgets, all the attention. Me? I got his hand-me-downs. And yes, that included his clothes, which was particularly tough since, you know, I was a girl who desperately wanted to wear something feminine for once. The only real bright spot in my childhood was my grandmother, Mom's mother. She was my saving grace, picking me up from school every day and taking me to her house. Unlike my parents, who were always too busy with my brother's activities, Grandma actually cared about my life. "How was school today, sweetheart?" she'd ask, her eyes twinkling with genuine interest as we walked home. "Did you learn anything exciting?" She was the one who showed up at parent-teacher meetings, who checked my homework, who actually knew what was happening in my life. While my parents were busy playing Monopoly with my brother, their favorite family activity that somehow never included me, I'd be sent off to watch cartoons alone. "Sandra, honey, why don't you go watch TV?" Mom would say whenever I tried to join their game. "The rules are too complicated for you." That was pretty much how things went in our house. I learned early on to be self-sufficient, cooking my own lunch, cleaning my room, doing my homework without help. It wasn't that my parents were bad people, they just had their golden child, and it wasn't me. But looking back now, I can see how those early experiences shaped me. While they were grooming my brother to be their future business prodigy, I was developing independence and self-reliance. I learned to take care of myself, to find my own path, and most importantly, to recognize the value of having someone like my grandmother in my corner. Everything changed the day I bought that superhero comic book. I'd saved up my pocket money for weeks, counting every penny until I finally had enough. Standing in front of the magazine rack, I felt like I was about to discover a whole new world, and I was right. "Are you sure you want to spend your money on that?" the store clerk asked, probably used to kids buying candy instead. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, clutching my precious purchase. That night, I couldn't sleep. The artwork in the comic book was mesmerizing. I found myself tracing the lines with my fingers, studying how the artists created movement and emotion with just ink and paper. The next morning, I grabbed some notebook paper and started drawing. At first, my sketches were rough, stick figures with wobbly lines. But I practiced every chance I got. During lunch breaks, after homework, even during some classes, sorry, math teacher. Soon, my drawing started improving, and that's when an idea hit me. "Hey, what if we created our own superhero?" I suggested to my friends during lunch one day. "Someone different from the usual ones." "Like what?" my friend Lisa asked, genuinely interested. "What about a hero who helps homeless animals and kids in need?" I suggested, already sketching in my notebook. "No fancy superpowers, just someone who actually cares." My friends loved it. We started working on it together, coming up with stories during lunch breaks. I'd draw rough sketches, and we'd all contribute ideas. Our hero became real to us, a regular person who chose to make a difference. Ms. Thompson, our homeroom teacher, caught us passing around our latest comic story during class one day. Instead of getting angry, she asked to see it. I nervously handed over our work, expecting detention. "Sandra, this is remarkable," she said, flipping through the pages. "Would you consider doing something like this for the school newspaper?" Before I knew it, our little comic was appearing in the school paper. Other students started coming up to me in the hallways, asking about the next installment. For the first time in my life, I was known for something I'd created, not as someone's sister. My brother noticed the attention I was getting. "It's just some dumb drawings," he'd mutter at home, clearly annoyed that people were talking about me instead of him. Then came career day. Ms. Thompson asked everyone what they wanted to be when they grew up. Without thinking, I stood up and said, "A designer." The whole class erupted in support. "That makes so much sense. Your art is amazing. You'd be perfect for that." Ms. Thompson smiled warmly. "With your talent and dedication, I think that's a wonderful choice, Sandra." I was so excited that I couldn't wait to tell my parents. That evening at dinner, I shared my dream. "A designer?" Mom laughed, exchanging looks with Dad. "Honey, that's not a real career path. If you want to be successful," Dad added, "you need to think like an entrepreneur. Look at your brother, he already understands business principles." "But I don't want to do business," I protested. "I want to create things." "Creating things won't pay the bills," Mom dismissed my dream with a wave of her hand. "You need to be practical." Hurt and disappointed, I went to the one person I knew would understand, Grandma. When I showed her my drawings and told her about my dreams, her eyes lit up. "My talented girl," she said, hugging me tight. "Wait right here." The next day, she surprised me with an easel, real canvases, and a set of professional paints. But that wasn't all. She cleared out her spare room, transforming it into a proper art studio just for me. Time moved on, and my brother graduated from high school with all the fanfare you'd expect. The graduation party my parents threw for him was extravagant. They invited the whole family and all his friends. I still remember the day he announced his college plans at dinner, right after the festivities had died down. "I got accepted into the economics program," he declared proudly, waving his acceptance letter. "I'm going to be the richest businessman this family has ever seen. Just watch me." That's our boy, Dad beamed, raising his glass. Now that's what I call planning for the future. You'll make us all proud. Mom wiped away happy tears. We always knew you were destined for great things. Meanwhile, I was in my final years of high school, splitting my time between regular classes and developing my art portfolio. My little studio at Grandma's had become my sanctuary, walls covered with sketches and paintings. Every new piece felt like another step toward my dream of becoming a designer. I'd spend hours there after school, perfecting my techniques and working on new projects. When graduation finally came around, I'd already been accepted into the design program at the local college. My portfolio had impressed the admissions committee, but my parents' reaction was less than enthusiastic. Well, Mom sighed, looking at my acceptance letter like it was a bill she didn't want to pay. I suppose we'll pay for it. But don't come crying to us when you can't find a job. Art degrees aren't exactly practical. By the time I started college, my brother had already graduated and opened his own auto parts store. My parents couldn't stop talking about it. Every family dinner, every phone call, every conversation somehow circled back to his entrepreneurial spirit. I was just starting to feel comfortable in my college routine, really diving into my design projects and making friends with like-minded creative people, when everything exploded. My parents showed up unannounced one day after my design theory class, catching me as I was walking across campus with my portfolio case. "Sandra, we need to talk," Mom said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a casual visit. Her face had that determined look I'd learned to dread over the years. "You need to leave college," Dad announced without preamble, standing in the middle of the campus walkway. "Your brother needs help at the store." I thought they were joking at first. "What? You can't be serious." "He's spending too much on employee salaries," Mom explained, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "As his sister, you can work for free. It's the least you can do for family. We've always taught you the importance of family." They laid out their plan in excruciating detail. I'd work as a salesperson, handle inventory, make cold calls, and clean the store every evening. All without pay, of course. They'd clearly thought this through, though they hadn't thought about what I wanted at all. "And what exactly will my brother be doing while I'm doing all this work?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. I could feel my hands cramping around my portfolio case, my knuckles turning white from the grip. Mom's expression brightened, as if she was explaining something wonderful to a particularly slow child. "He'll be managing the store, of course. He has a business degree, Sandra. He's qualified to run things. Your brother has studied for this." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. "I'm not dropping out. I've already done an internship at Davidson Design Studio, and they've hinted at a position after graduation. That's what I want, to work as a designer. They even said they've never had an intern with my level of creativity." Mom's laugh cut through the air like a knife. It was loud enough to make nearby students turn and stare, some of them giving me sympathetic looks. "Oh, honey. You want to work for someone else's uncle? Be someone's employee? We're offering you a family business, a real future. Do you know how many people would kill for this opportunity?" "Mom, please," I pleaded, fighting back tears. My portfolio felt heavy in my hands, filled with projects I'd poured my heart into. "I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to run a business. I want to draw. I want to create. I'm good at it. My professors say I have real talent. Professor Jenkins even said I could have a real future in this field." "Talent doesn't pay bills," Mom snapped, her face hardening. "But since you're being stubborn about this..." She straightened her jacket and turned to Dad. "We're going to the administration office right now. We'll tell them you're no longer a student here and that we're withdrawing our tuition payment." My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Mom, Dad, please don't do this. Please just listen to me for once. This is my future we're talking about." "There's nothing to discuss," Mom said coldly. "You either come work at the store, or we stop paying for this hobby of yours. It's time you grew up and faced reality. Through my tears, I watched my parents' figures getting smaller as they walked away, heading to dismantle my future. The autumn leaves swirled around them as they disappeared into the building. 45 minutes later, they emerged, looking pleased with themselves. They spotted me still sitting on the bench and walked over, triumphant smiles on their faces. "Well, that's taken care of," Mom announced brightly. "We've signed the withdrawal papers and canceled the tuition payments. You're officially no longer a student here starting next semester. Time to pack up your things and come home," Dad added, as if he was telling me about a surprise party. "Your brother needs you at the store first thing Monday morning." "Welcome to the real world, Sandra," Mom said, patting my shoulder. "Trust me, you'll look back on this day and realize we did you a favor. Now let's go home, you have a lot of packing to do." They turned and walked away, leaving me sitting there with my now useless portfolio and shattered dreams. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who had never let me down. "Grandma," I sobbed into the phone. "They're making me leave college." They went to the administration and... "Slow down, sweetheart," her calm voice came through. "Tell me everything." Through tears, I explained the situation, the store, my brother's needs, my parents' ultimatum, everything. Grandma listened quietly, only occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. "Don't pack a single thing," she said firmly when I finished. "I'm coming down there tomorrow. This nonsense stops now. You just focus on your studies." True to her word, Grandma arrived 3 days later. I didn't go with her to the administration building, I was too nervous, but when she came out 2 hours later, she was smiling. "It's all taken care of," she announced. "I paid for the rest of your education. You're staying right where you belong." I hugged her so tight I thought I might break something. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The peace lasted exactly 6 hours, and all this time, Grandma spent time with me. That's when Mom called her. "How dare you interfere?" I could hear Mom's voice screaming through the phone from across the room. "This is none of your business." Grandma held the phone away from her ear, rolling her eyes. "It became my business when you tried to destroy your daughter's future." The yelling continued for several minutes before Grandma simply hung up. Then my phone started ringing. "If you don't come to your senses right now," Mom's voice was ice cold, "you can consider yourself disinherited." "Is that what you want? To throw away your family for some art classes?" I took a deep breath, my hand steady for the first time in days. "I'm staying in college, Mom." "I'm sorry, but I have to follow my own path." "Then you're no daughter of mine." The line went dead. An hour later, I saw the Facebook post, heartbroken. "Our own daughter has abandoned her family in our time of need. She's chosen selfish pursuits over family loyalty. Please pray for us during this difficult time." The comments section exploded. Aunt Sarah wrote, "I always knew she was an ungrateful child." Uncle Jim countered with, "Let the girl follow her dreams." Cousin Rachel chimed in about family obligations, while my high school friend Emma defended my right to choose my own path. I sat on my bed, reading comment after comment, feeling sick to my stomach. Grandma found me there, still scrolling through the reactions. "Stop reading that garbage," she said firmly, taking my phone away. "You know what? I've made a decision. I'm changing my will, everything I have is going to you." I looked up, startled. "Grandma, no, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I've watched your parents and brother long enough. They'd burn through my life savings in a month on another half-baked business scheme. But you," she cupped my face in her hands, "you have real talent and drive. You'll make something of yourself." Life has a funny way of proving people right or wrong. I was deep into my final year of college when Grandma called with the news about my brother's store. "It's closing down," she said, trying to keep the "I told you so" out of her voice. "Your brother couldn't make the numbers work." "What happened?" I asked, though I already had a pretty good idea. Same old story, more money going out than coming in. But here's the kicker. She paused for dramatic effect. He's already got another brilliant business idea. Sure enough, a week later, my brother's Facebook status lit up with excitement, proud to announce my newest venture. Opening Ink Master Studios with my buddy Mike. Best tattoo parlor in town, coming soon. Entrepreneur, business owner, success. I couldn't help but notice he'd used the artist emoji when he'd always mocked my artistic pursuits. Grandma kept me updated on the family drama. Your parents took out another loan against what's left of their equity, she told me during one of our weekly dinners. They're funding this tattoo parlor scheme now. Second mortgage, if you can believe it. The tattoo parlor started off with a big grand opening party. My brother posted daily photos of their luxury space, way too big for a starter business, but he always did think bigger was better. Their social media was full of professional-looking photos of the expensive furniture and top-of-the-line equipment. But then the posts started changing. More and more of them featured free tattoos for influencers and promotional work. Especially, as Grandma noted with a snort, for pretty girls who caught my brother's or Mike's eye. It took exactly 1 year for the tattoo parlor to go under. Too much overhead, too many freebies, not enough paying customers. The going out of business sign went up without any social media fanfare. Meanwhile, my life was taking a very different direction. I graduated with honors, my final portfolio stronger than I could have imagined when I first started college. The day after graduation, I got the call I'd been hoping for. We'd love to have you join our team, said Sarah, the creative director at Davidson Design Studio. Your internship work was exceptional, and your current portfolio, well, let's just say we'd be crazy to let you go elsewhere. The salary they offered was more than I'd expected for a starting position. Within a month, I'd found a small but charming apartment of my own. It wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom with good natural light for my artwork space, but it was mine. Every payday, I put a portion of my salary into savings. After watching my family's financial drama unfold, I was determined to build a secure future for myself. My first big project at the firm got rave reviews from the client, and I could feel my professional reputation growing. See? Grandma said when I showed her my first big client presentation. This is what happens when you stick to your guns and follow your talent. The house of cards my parents had built finally came crashing down. 2 business loans, both secured against their house, became impossible to pay when my brother's ventures failed. I heard they're selling the house from Grandma during our weekly calls. Even after selling the house, they were still underwater. They started selling everything else, Mom's precious antique collection, Dad's beloved golf clubs, their matching luxury cars, even Mom's designer handbags she'd been so proud of. The real shock came when my brother announced he was moving to Arizona. Can't help with the loans, he told them. Those are in your names, not mine. I need a fresh start. I was at Grandma's house one Sunday afternoon, helping her organize her craft room, when a moving truck pulled up outside. Through the window, I watched in disbelief as my parents climbed out of their now ancient Toyota, the only vehicle they had left. We're here, Mom announced, walking straight through Grandma's front door without knocking. Where should we put our things? Grandma stood in her hallway, arms crossed. And what exactly do you think you're doing? Moving in, of course, Dad said, already directing movers with their boxes. We have nowhere else to go. Oh, really? Grandma's voice could have frozen hell. And who said you could live here? Mom looked shocked. Mom, we're your family. You can't turn us away. We lost everything because of those loans. You mean the loans you took out to finance your precious son's half-baked schemes? Grandma's eyebrow arched. The same son who abandoned you to your debts. Well, Mom said, lifting her chin. It doesn't matter. I'm your only daughter, I'll inherit this house anyway. We might as well move in now. Grandma's laugh was sharp and cold. Is that what you think? Let me clear something up for you right now. Every penny I have, every brick in this house, is going to Sandra. I've seen how you handle money. You and your son would burn through my life savings in months." Mom's face contorted with rage as she processed Grandma's words. Then she turned on me, her finger pointing accusingly. She spat. "You planned this all along, didn't you? Turning my own mother against me, stealing my inheritance like a common thief." I stood there, feeling strangely calm in the face of her fury. Years ago, this would have reduced me to tears, but not anymore. "Mom, you need to leave." "Leave?" she shrieked. "Listen to you. Acting like you own this place already. Who do you think you are, giving orders in your grandmother's house?" Mom was on a roll now, years of resentment pouring out. "You ungrateful little snake. First you abandoned the family business, then you turned my mother against me, and now you're standing there acting like you're better than us?" "Mom," I said quietly, "please leave. This isn't your house, and you're not welcome here." "Not welcome?" She laughed hysterically. "I'm her daughter, her only daughter, and you're just..." Before she could finish, Grandma stepped forward and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. "She's the only person who's ever felt truly at home here," she said firmly. "The only one who appreciated this house for more than its monetary value. The only one who filled it with creativity and joy instead of schemes and demands. Now, both of you, get out of my house. And take your boxes with you." They left, but not quietly. Mom cursed and ranted all the way down the driveway, while Dad tried to negotiate until the very end. Through it all, Grandma and I stood in the doorway, watching them load their boxes back into the truck. That was 3 years ago. Life has moved forward, as it tends to do. I'm still at Davidson Design Studio, where I've been promoted to lead designer on several major accounts. My latest project, rebranding a national coffee chain, just won an industry award. I haven't spoken to my parents or my brother since that day at Grandma's house. Sometimes I see posts from my brother on social media. He's always starting some new venture, always claiming this one will be his big break. My parents, I hear through family gossip, are living in a small apartment on the other side of town. But Grandma and I have only grown closer. Last month, I used some of my savings to help renovate her house. I designed everything myself, new color schemes, custom artwork for the walls, even some unique furniture pieces I commissioned from local artisans. Grandma loves showing it off to her friends. My granddaughter did all this, she tells everyone who visits. She designed everything herself. Didn't she do a wonderful job? Sometimes, when she's hosting her bridge club or her garden society meetings, I sit in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I used to do my homework after school, and listen to her proudly giving tours. It makes me smile every time. Yesterday, as we sat on her newly redesigned back porch, drinking tea and watching the sunset, she turned to me with a twinkle in her eye. "You know what the best investment I ever made was?" she asked. "What's that?" "Paying for your college education," she said, squeezing my hand. "Some people invest in stocks or real estate. I invested in your dreams. And look how well that turned out." I couldn't argue with that. Looking around at the beautiful space we'd created together, I felt completely at peace with all my choices. My name is Brittany, and I often think about how different my life could have been if my mom hadn't gotten sick. She passed away when I was 6, and that's when everything changed. Our house used to be full of her laughter, and the photos of our happy family covered every wall. Dad took it really hard. For months, he barely spoke, just went to work and came back home, where I tried my best to be quiet and not bother him. I didn't really understand death back then. I kept asking when Mom would come back from heaven. Dad would just hug me tight and say nothing. Then he met Sandra at some work event. She started coming over for dinner, and I noticed Dad smiling more. I guess that's why I didn't say anything when, one by one, Mom's photos started disappearing from the walls, replaced by new ones with Sandra in them. "Brittany, Sandra, and I have something to tell you," Dad said one evening. They sat me down in our living room, and I remember playing with the hem of my dress, feeling nervous. "Sandra and I are getting married." She's going to live with us and be your new mom. You'll see, everything will be wonderful. But it wasn't wonderful. As soon as they got back from their honeymoon, Sandra started changing things. She rearranged all the furniture, repainted the walls, and set up what she called house rules. "Brittany, your room is a mess again," she'd say every morning. "A young lady should keep her space tidy. And please keep your voice down when you're playing, I have a headache." I always had to help with chores, even though I was just 6. When I complained to Dad, he'd just say, "Listen to Sandra, honey. She knows what's best for you." One day, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out the words. "She's just not adjusting well, John," Sandra was saying. "Maybe it would be better if she lived with your mother? She's always saying how much she misses having family around." No, Dad's voice was quiet. "I promised Sarah, I promised her before I swore I'd take care of Brittany. And there's the money she left for Brittany's college. I gave my word it would go to her education." I didn't know it then, but things were about to get even harder. A year later, Sandra got pregnant, and everything changed again. Dad was over the moon, and Sandra couldn't stop talking about how she was finally going to have her own child. Those words hurt more than any chore or rule she'd ever given me. Because that's what I was to her, someone else's child. Not her own. Never her own. When Emma was born, I was 8 years old. I remember standing in the hospital hallway with Dad, peering through the nursery window at my new baby sister. She was so tiny, wrapped in a pink blanket, and Dad couldn't stop smiling. "You're a big sister now, Brittany," he said proudly. "You'll help take care of Emma, won't you?" I nodded eagerly, not understanding what that really meant. But I found out pretty quickly when they brought Emma home. Sandra wasted no time in turning me into her personal assistant. "Brittany, bring me fresh diapers. Brittany, wash these bottles. Brittany, hold Emma while I make a phone call." The demands never stopped. By the time I was 9, I knew how to change diapers, prepare baby formula, and cook simple baby food. While other kids my age were playing outside after school, I was mashing bananas and stirring rice cereal for Emma. "But I want to go to Sarah's birthday party," I remember pleading one Saturday. "Emma needs you here," Sandra said firmly. "She's teething and fussy. Besides, someone needs to clean up the mess she made in the playroom." As Emma grew, so did my responsibilities. I had to watch her constantly, making sure she didn't fall while learning to walk or put dangerous things in her mouth. Meanwhile, Emma was showered with attention and gifts. Every tantrum was rewarded with a new toy or treat. When she turned 4, Emma realized she could get me in trouble whenever she wanted. And boy, did she use that power. One time, she deliberately spilled her juice all over her new dress, then ran crying to Sandra. "Brittany pushed me," she wailed. I spent that weekend grounded in my room. Another time, she broke her expensive musical toy and blamed me. "Brittany was playing with it when it broke," she claimed. It didn't matter that I was doing homework at the time, I lost my allowance for a month to pay for a replacement. The worst was when she cut up her own party dress with scissors, then hid the scissors in my backpack. Sandra found them during one of her room inspections. "How could you be so jealous?" Sandra yelled at me. "Do you know how much that dress cost?" But I didn't, I tried to explain. "Go to your room," Dad interrupted. "We'll discuss your punishment later." Emma stood in the doorway, smirking at me as I walked past. She'd learned early that she could get away with anything, while I'd get blamed for everything. Grandma Rose was my only escape from the madness at home. Every weekend I spent at her house felt like stepping into a different world, one where I could just be a kid. She lived in a cozy house filled with the smell of fresh-baked cookies and unconditional love. "Look at you, skin and bones," she'd say, loading my plate with pancakes. "That woman's got you running around like Cinderella." Unlike at home, at Grandma's house, I could laugh as loud as I wanted and didn't have to watch my every step. When Emma visited with me once, she quickly learned that her usual tricks wouldn't work there. But I want ice cream before dinner, Emma had whined, stomping her feet. Young lady, Grandma said firmly, in this house, we eat our dinner first. And there's no rewards for tantrums. Emma never came back after that. Grandma's house is boring, she told our parents. What she meant was that Grandma's house had rules that applied to everyone equally. Then came the day that changed everything. Emma had thrown a particularly dramatic fit about doing her homework, and Grandma happened to be visiting. John, Grandma said to Dad, her voice stern, that child is terribly spoiled. Sandra, you need to handle this better. You're raising a little tyrant. Sandra's face turned red. How dare you criticize my parenting? You have no right. I have every right when I see my granddaughters being treated so differently, Grandma shot back. Look at what you're doing to Brittany. That night, I heard more shouting from downstairs. Sandra was crying, saying she wouldn't tolerate such disrespect. Dad, as usual, took her side. The next day, Sandra announced that we would no longer be visiting Grandma Rose. But that's not fair, I protested. Life isn't fair, Sandra snapped. And if I catch you trying to contact her, you'll be grounded until college. College. That word became my lifeline during the next couple of years. I threw myself into studying, counting down the days until graduation. Mom had left money for my education, I'd overheard Dad talking about it enough times. That money was my ticket out. Then came graduation day. I was still in my cap and gown when Dad and Sandra sat me down for a serious talk. About college, Dad started, not meeting my eyes. We've decided to save that money for Emma's education instead. The world stopped. What? Your sister has such bright prospects, Sandra added smoothly. And you, well, you're more suited for practical work. Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I screamed. That's my money. Mom left it for me. You promised her, Dad. You're just a liar. You ungrateful girl, Dad shouted, his face red. After everything we've done for you. Get out. Tomorrow you can start your adult life somewhere else. I didn't wait for tomorrow. I ran upstairs, threw some clothes and essentials into my backpack, grabbed the hidden photo of Mom, and walked out. My friend Jenny had always said I could stay with her family if things got bad, and now things had gotten as bad as they could get. Life as a waitress wasn't what I'd dreamed of doing after high school, but it paid the bills, barely. I started at the Silver Spoon, a busy downtown restaurant, working double shifts whenever I could. My feet ached every night, and I smelled like French fries and burger grease, but at least I was free. Jenny's parents were amazing, letting me stay with them for those first few months. But I knew I couldn't impose forever. That's when I met Maria, another waitress at the restaurant, who was looking for a roommate. The apartment's tiny, she warned me, and the neighbors are loud, but it's cheap. She wasn't kidding about tiny. Our shared apartment could barely fit 2 beds and a couch. But it was ours, and neither of us had to answer to anyone else. We worked the same shifts, shared grocery bills, and somehow made it work. Any plans for school? Maria would ask sometimes, as we counted our tips after closing. I'd just shake my head. With rent, utilities, and food, I could barely save anything. College felt like a distant dream that had died the night I left home. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. I almost dropped the coffee pot I was holding when I saw the number. Brittany, sweetheart, I've been trying to track you down. How's college going? My throat tightened. I'm not in college, Grandma. What do you mean? Your father had Sarah's money set aside. I found myself telling her everything, the fight, getting kicked out, working as a waitress. By the end, I was crying in the restaurant's break room, and Grandma was silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. Those miserable, selfish. She finally said, her voice shaking with anger. Listen to me, Brittany. I'm paying for your college. No arguments. Grandma, no, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm doing it. Your mother was like a daughter to me, and I won't let them steal your future. Have you looked at any schools? I could try the local university. They have evening classes. Perfect. We'll get you enrolled for next semester. But Brittany? She paused. Let's keep this between us. I don't want to deal with your father or that woman. I laughed through my tears. Trust me, Grandma, neither do I. So that's how I became a full-time waitress and a part-time student. My day started at 5 a.m. with studying, then classes, then straight to work until closing. I'd come home exhausted, feet blistered, smelling like restaurant food, only to crack open my books again. Maria thought I was crazy. Girl, when do you sleep? Sleep is for the weak, I'd joke, downing my third cup of coffee. But for the first time since I'd left home, I felt like I was moving forward. Every test I passed, every paper I turned in, felt like a small victory. Not just for me, but for Mom too. I might not have gotten to use her money, but I was still going to get the education she'd wanted for me. And the best part? Nobody from my family knew. They probably imagined me still serving tables, going nowhere in life. Let them think that. I was done trying to prove myself to people who'd never cared anyway. I was studying for my business management final when Emma's message popped up on Facebook. There she was, grinning beside a brand new red Mercedes, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Look what Mom and Dad got me for my birthday. Not that you'd know anything about nice cars, huh? Still serving burgers? Must be fun watching everyone else live their best life while you're stuck being a waitress forever. The next photo was of her college acceptance letter. Got into State U. Mom and Dad are paying for everything, tuition, housing, meal plan. They even promised me a spring break trip to Europe. But hey, at least you get free fries with your shift meal, right? I stared at my textbook, then back at her message. I could have told her about my 3.9 GPA, about how I was about to graduate with honors. Instead, I clicked block user and went back to studying. 3 weeks later, I graduated with my business degree. Only Grandma was there to watch me walk across the stage, but that was all I needed. We went out for dinner afterward, at a different restaurant, of course. Back at work, things started changing. Mr. Peterson, the owner, called me into his office one morning. Brittany, we've noticed how hard you work. How would you feel about becoming shift manager? You know this place inside and out, the staff respects you, and you've got the education for it now. That was just the beginning. 6 months later, I was promoted to floor administrator. My salary doubled, and suddenly I could afford to move out of the tiny apartment I shared with Maria. Years passed, and I kept climbing. By 30, I was running the whole place. The Silver Spoon had transformed from a regular downtown restaurant into one of the city's top dining spots. My name was on restaurant industry magazines, but my family still thought I was just a waitress. My new apartment was in one of those fancy high-rises downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. Every morning, I'd stand there with my coffee, watching the sunrise, thinking about how far I'd come from that scared teenager who ran away with just a backpack. It was a quiet Monday morning when I got the Facebook message from Mrs. Roberts, our old neighbor. We'd kept in touch over the years. She was one of the few people from my old life who'd been kind to me. She'd often slip me cookies when Sandra was being particularly harsh, and once even helped me hide my mom's photo album when Sandra wanted to throw it away. Brittany, honey, I thought you should know. Emma's graduating next week, and she's planning something nasty. She's made reservations at the Silver Spoon, she knows you work there. She's been bragging to everyone about how she's going to have you wait on her table. Says it'll be hilarious to have her college dropout sister serve her graduation party. She's invited all her snobby friends and even some of our old neighbors. She's been telling everyone how she's going to show them what a failure you turned out to be. I thought you should know. I sat back in my leather office chair, looking out over the restaurant floor, through the one-way glass. The lunch rush was just beginning, and I watched my well-trained staff move efficiently between tables, like a perfectly choreographed dance. A slow smile spread across my face as I opened our reservation system. Sure enough, there it was, Emma Wilson, party of 15, Saturday 7 p.m., graduation celebration. She'd even added a special note requesting the best table in the house, price is no object. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could cancel it. One click, and their reservation would disappear. I could have Janet call with some excuse about a plumbing emergency or a double booking. But no, I had a better idea. I picked up my phone and called Grandma, who answered on the second ring. She was probably in her garden. She always kept her phone close while tending to her prized roses. "You'll never guess who's coming to dine at my restaurant," I said when she answered. "Who?" "Emma. And Dad and Sandra. They're coming to celebrate her graduation. Apparently, she specifically chose this place to humiliate her waitress sister. Mrs. Roberts just warned me about it." Grandma's voice turned sharp. "Cancel their reservation. You don't need that kind of negativity in your life, Brittany. Haven't they hurt you enough?" Actually, I couldn't help grinning as I looked at the framed Businesswoman of the Year award on my wall. "I have a better idea. How would you like to come to dinner that night? I'll give you the best table in the house, behind the marble column by the waterfall wall. You'll be able to see everything, but they won't see you." There was a pause, then Grandma started laughing, that deep, mischievous laugh that always meant trouble when I was growing up. "Oh, you devious girl. Count me in. Should I wear my pearls for the occasion?" "Perfect. I'll have Carlos make your favorite chocolate souffle. He's been practicing that new raspberry sauce you liked last time." "I'll bring my camera," Grandma chuckled. "This is going to be better than those reality TV shows you used to watch." After we hung up, I called in my assistant. "Janet, clear my schedule for next Saturday evening. And make sure the staff knows I'll be handling a special table personally." "Of course, Ms. Wilson." "Anything else?" "Yes," I smiled, running my finger along the spine of my business management degree diploma hanging on the wall. "Make sure we have our finest champagne chilled. And have Miguel prepare his special caviar appetizers. I have a feeling it's going to be quite a memorable night." As I looked out over my restaurant again, I couldn't help but think how perfect this was. Emma had always loved her little power plays, her attempts to humiliate me. Well, this time, she was walking right into my territory. And I was ready. Saturday evening arrived, and the restaurant was buzzing with its usual weekend energy. I watched from my office as my sister's party arrived, Emma in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, Sandra in her typical overdone makeup, and Dad looking older than I remembered. They were surrounded by Emma's friends, all dressed to impress. I could see Grandma at her hidden table, pretending to read the menu while watching everything. She gave me a subtle wink when I passed by. "Excuse me," Emma's loud voice carried across the restaurant. "I specifically requested my sister, Brittany, as our server." "Where is she?" I smoothed down my tailored suit jacket and approached their table. Emma's face lit up with malicious delight when she saw me. "Oh my God, everyone, this is my sister I was telling you about." She gestured at me like I was some exhibit at a zoo. Still a waitress after all these years. I mean, I just graduated from State U, and she's still carrying plates. The table erupted in laughter, led by Emma. Dad chuckled too, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Sandra just sat there with that superior smirk I remembered so well. "Look at her clothes," Emma stage whispered to her friends. "I guess that's what you can afford on a waitress's salary." I stood there in my Armani suit, letting them laugh. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What can I get for you this evening?" I asked professionally. Emma made a show of studying the menu. "Well, since you asked, I'll have the lobster thermidor." "Oh wait." She looked up with fake concern. "Can you even afford to eat at a place like this? Do you know what lobster is?" More forced laughter from her friends, though some were starting to look uncomfortable. And after dinner, Emma continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "I want you to personally wash our dishes." I'll even give you a nice tip, maybe you can buy yourself some decent clothes for once. I could see Grandma gripping her table's edge so hard her knuckles were white. Some of the guests were whispering among themselves, clearly embarrassed by Emma's behavior. Sandra finally spoke up, her voice cold. Really, Brittany, you should be grateful Emma chose your establishment for her celebration. Though I must say, I'm surprised they hired someone like you at such a nice place. Actually, I said, my smile never wavering, I won't be able to take your order or wash your dishes tonight. Emma's face darkened. What do you mean, you won't? I want to speak to your manager right now. I'll have you fired. That won't be necessary, I said calmly. The manager is already here. Well, where are they? Emma demanded, looking around. You're looking at her. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dad's face had gone completely white, and Sandra looked like she'd swallowed something sour. That's impossible, Emma finally sputtered. You're lying. You're just a waitress. Actually, came a familiar voice, she's not just the manager. She owns 30% of this restaurant now. Grandma rose from her hidden table and walked over, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The look she gave Dad could have frozen hell over. While you were busy spoiling one daughter and crushing the other, I put Brittany through college. She worked here as a waitress during the day and studied business management at night. Every single success she has, she earned herself. Emma jumped up, her face red. That's not fair. You're lying. She's nothing but a successful businesswoman who owns part of one of the city's most prestigious restaurants? Grandma cut in. Who bought her own luxury apartment while you're still living off Daddy's money? Is that what you were going to say? Dad finally found his voice. Mom, Don't you dare, Mom me, John Wilson, Grandma snapped. You let that woman turn you against your own daughter. You gave away Brittany's college money her mother left specifically for her. Well, guess what? I'm making things right. I've already changed my will. Everything I own goes to Brittany. Every penny. Sandra shot up from her chair. You can't do that. Emma is your granddaughter too. Emma has had everything handed to her on a silver platter her entire life, Grandma replied coldly. She doesn't need my money, though from what I've seen tonight, she could use some basic human decency. Emma completely lost it. She grabbed her wine glass and hurled it across the table, shattering plates and sending food flying. This isn't fair. You're all just jealous of me. Security, I called calmly. 2 men in black suits appeared instantly. Please escort these people out. You can't throw us out, Sandra screamed. Do you know who we are? Yes, I do, I replied. You're trespassers causing a disturbance in my restaurant. Leave now, or I'll call the police and press charges for the damage to my property. Emma tried to grab another plate, but one of the security guards caught her arm. Dad just stood there, looking lost, as they were all led to the door. Brittany, he called back weakly. Please, can we talk? I turned my back and walked away. Over the next few months, he tried everything, calls, emails, even showing up at the restaurant once. I had security turn him away. That was 5 years ago. The Silver Spoon is now the top-rated restaurant in the city, and I've opened 2 more locations. Grandma kept her word about the will, though thankfully she's still going strong at 75, tending her garden and coming to the restaurant every Sunday for her chocolate soufflé. Last week, I got another message from Emma. Something about how she's changed and wants to make amends. I did what I always do with messages from that part of my life, hit delete and went back to work. Some chapters are better left closed. My name is Abigail Stewart, and I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, as they say. Not that I realized it at first. When you grow up wealthy, you think everyone lives like you do. Our family owned the largest chain of pharmacies in the state, Stewart Pharmaceuticals. It wasn't just a business, it was my grandfather's legacy. He built it from nothing, and my father David inherited it when I was just a kid. The business became my father's whole identity. He'd walk into our massive Victorian house after work, loosen his expensive tie, and start talking about profit margins before even saying hello. Another record quarter, he'd announce at dinner, while my mother Margaret nodded approvingly, adjusting her pearl necklace. This is what I'm going to pass down to my children someday. My older brother James would just push his food around the plate during these conversations. Even at 12, while I was still playing with dolls, he was more interested in ancient civilizations than profit margins. He'd try to change the subject to his latest archaeological discovery from the backyard, but Dad would just wave it off. I was different, though. Even as a kid, I loved helping out at the pharmacies. By the time I was 14, I knew all our regular customers by name and could recite our inventory like the alphabet. Dad noticed. Now that's my girl, he'd beam when I'd tell him about helping an elderly customer find the right medication or suggesting a new display arrangement that increased sales. She's got business in her blood. The shift happened gradually. As James buried himself deeper in history books and archaeological journals, Dad started bringing me to business meetings. By 16, I was doing inventory counts and helping with basic accounting. "Watch and learn, Abigail," Dad would say, showing me how to review contracts. "This will all be yours someday." My mother was thrilled too. Finally, someone to carry on the family tradition properly, she'd say, giving me expensive business suits for my birthday while James got cheap history books. I remember the day James announced he was going to study archaeology in college. We were having dinner in our formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier that cost more than most cars. "You're what?" Dad exploded, his fork clattering against the fine china. "No son of mine is going to waste his life digging in the dirt." "David, please," Mom tried to calm him down, but her face showed she agreed with him. "It's what I love, Dad," James said quietly but firmly. "I've already been accepted to the program, and Professor Anderson says I have real potential." "Potential to be poor," Dad shouted. "We're business people, not dirt scholars." I watched James's face set in that determined way I knew meant his mind was made up. "Then I guess I'm not a business person," he said, standing up from the table. That was the night everything changed. Dad turned all his attention, and expectations, to me. I was no longer just the backup plan, I was the future of Stewart Pharmaceuticals. The pressure was intense, but I loved it. Or at least, I thought I did. Preston Business College was everything I'd dreamed of, prestigious, competitive, and full of other trust fund kids just like me. I felt right at home with my designer clothes and platinum credit card. That's when I met Zane. It was in the campus library, of all places. I was struggling with a coding assignment when this guy at the next table noticed me cursing under my breath at my laptop. "Need some help?" he asked, sliding into the chair next to me. He had the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen and a slight accent I couldn't place. That's how it started. Zane was brilliant, he'd gotten a full scholarship to study computer science and was at the top of his class. Everyone knew him, professors would use his projects as examples, other students would fight to have him on their team for group assignments. But he was so humble about it all. It took me 3 coffee study sessions to work up the courage to ask about his background. He told me matter-of-factly about his parents immigrating from Syria when he was little, about his dad working security and his mom cleaning houses. How he'd been coding since he was 12, teaching himself on a second-hand laptop. "I used to do freelance work after school," he said. "Had to help with the bills, you know?" I didn't know, actually. I'd never had to worry about bills in my life. But something about the way he said it, no self-pity, just stating facts, made me admire him even more. We started dating a month later. Zane was different from the rich boys I'd grown up with. He opened doors because he was genuinely polite, not because etiquette class had drilled it into him. When he took me out, it was to small family-owned restaurants where the food was amazing and the owners knew him by name. 6 months in, he proposed. Not with some massive diamond like my dad would have expected, just a simple silver band he'd saved up for, given to me during a sunset walk through campus. It was perfect. Dad was thrilled when I told him I was engaged, at first. He immediately planned this huge family dinner to meet my fiancé, inviting all our relatives. I could practically hear him imagining some heir to a Fortune 500 company. The moment we walked into our massive dining room, I knew I was wrong. I watched my family's faces change, like someone had flipped a switch, from eager smiles to barely concealed sneers. My Aunt Patricia actually clutched her pearls. Mom's champagne glass froze halfway to her mouth. The silence was deafening until Dad cleared his throat. The sound echoed through our massive dining room like a gunshot. I could feel Zane's hand tense in mine under the table. "So, young man," Dad said in that condescending tone he usually reserved for his employees, drawing out each word like he was speaking to a child, "tell us about your background. Where exactly are you from?" Zane sat up straighter, maintaining his dignity despite the hostile atmosphere. I admired how he kept his voice steady and respectful. "My parents immigrated from Syria when I was young, sir. We've been here since I was 6. "And what do your parents do?" Dad pressed, his lip curling slightly. The crystal chandelier above us cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look almost sinister. "My father works as a security guard at Atlantic Corp, and my mother works as a cleaner," Zane answered honestly. His voice remained firm and proud. "I've worked part-time jobs since I was old enough to help support them. But I was fortunate to earn a full scholarship to Preston." My mother practically choked on her wine and grabbed her water glass, taking desperate gulps. The pearls around her neck trembled with each swallow. Aunt Patricia and Uncle George exchanged meaningful looks, while Cousin Rebecca actually snickered behind her manicured hand. Dad's face was getting redder by the second. The vein in his forehead, the one that only appeared when he was truly angry, began to pulse. "Well," he said, pushing his plate away with such force that the expensive china rattled, "I hope you understand, young man, that my Abigail is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. She's never wanted for anything. How exactly do you plan to provide for her?" Before I could jump in, Zane responded calmly, his composure a stark contrast to my father's growing anger. "I'm already successfully trading in cryptocurrency markets, Mr. Stewart. I built a substantial portfolio, and I'm developing plans for my own tech startup." "Cryptocurrency?" Dad interrupted with a harsh laugh that echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls. "You mean like what that scammer sold to Aunt Martha? The one who cleaned out her savings account?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Dad, that's completely different," I tried to explain, my heart pounding. "Zane's actually incredibly knowledgeable about blockchain technology. He's even been asked to speak at tech conferences." "Enough." Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle and the silverware jump. The sound made everyone at the table flinch, except Zane. "I know a con man when I see one. Your Aunt Martha thought she knew better too, didn't she?" "Mr. Stewart," Zane attempted to explain, still maintaining his composure even as my father's face grew darker, "I understand your concerns, but I assure you—" "No, you don't understand." Dad stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a screech that made my teeth hurt. He towered over the table, his hands planted firmly on the white tablecloth. "You're not suitable for my daughter. You're a migrant from a poor family. You don't understand our values, our way of life. You're not one of us." I watched in horror as my father, the man who'd taught me about business ethics and professional conduct, showed his true colors. The worst part was seeing how the rest of my family nodded along, as if he was just saying what they were all thinking. Dad wasn't done. His face twisted with rage as he jabbed his finger in Zane's direction. "I see right through you, you know that? You're just another gold digger with a sob story, trying to get your hands on my daughter's inheritance." "David, please," Mom interrupted, but not to defend Zane. She turned to me with what she probably thought was a motherly expression. "Honey, you're too young for marriage. Finish college first, come work at the company like we planned. There's plenty of time to think about marriage with someone more suitable. Uncle George cleared his throat. He's probably just after the pharmacy chain, David. These people are clever that way. Remember the Martinez boy who tried dating Rebecca? Aunt Patricia chimed in, talking about Zane as if he wasn't even there. Same thing, all charm until they get what they want. I watched Zane's face as my family continued their verbal assault. He sat perfectly still, his expression composed, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped his water glass. What kind of future could you possibly offer her? Dad sneered. Living in some tiny apartment, eating microwave dinners, while you waste time on your imaginary internet money? That was it. Something inside me snapped. I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward with a crash. Stop it. All of you, just stop. My voice shook with rage. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You're acting like entitled, prejudiced snobs. Abigail, Mom gasped, clutching her pearls. No, Mom, I'm done. I reached for Zane's hand. I've never been more embarrassed to be part of this family than I am right now. Come on, Zane, we're leaving. We walked toward the door, heads held high, while my relatives muttered and whispered behind us. Dad's voice boomed through the foyer as we reached for our coats. You walk out that door with him, Abigail, and you'll regret it. Do you hear me? After everything we've invested in you? All the money we spent on your education, your future? You owe us. I turned back one last time, meeting his furious gaze. The only thing I owe you is the courtesy of walking out instead of telling you exactly what I think of you right now. I heard him shouting about debts and obligations as we walked to Zane's car, but I didn't look back. Some debts, I was learning, weren't worth paying. A year flew by like a dream. Zane and I finished college, him with highest honors in computer science, me with my business degree. We'd moved into a modest apartment, and despite my family's dire predictions, we were happy. So when Zane suggested we stop waiting and get married that summer, I didn't hesitate. I spent hours crafting the perfect wedding announcement for social media. I posted a beautiful engagement photo of us, with a heartfelt message about love transcending boundaries. The responses started rolling in almost immediately. Not congratulations, attacks. Cousin Rebecca, I can't believe you're still with that fortune hunter. Count me out. Aunt Patricia, your poor parents must be so disappointed. We raised you better than this. Uncle George, no self-respecting steward would attend this travesty. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, each one more cruel than the last. I finally had to turn it off when my mother's comment appeared, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Don't expect us there." I cried for hours that night, while Zane held me and whispered that we could postpone, that maybe they just needed more time. But I was done waiting for my family to change. No, I said, wiping my eyes. We're getting married. With or without them. I didn't expect James to come. My brother was in the middle of an important dig in Egypt, something about a previously undiscovered tomb. But 2 days before the wedding, he showed up at our apartment door, covered in desert dust and grinning. You think I'd miss my little sister's wedding? He said, pulling me into a bear hug. Besides, someone's got to walk you down the aisle. The wedding was small but beautiful. We held it in a garden, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees. Zane's family filled one side of the aisle, warm, welcoming people who had embraced me as their own from day one. My side was painfully empty, save for James and a couple of distant cousins who had dared to defy the family boycott. A year passed. Zane's tech career was taking off, and I'd started my own small business consultancy. We were building our life together, brick by brick, without any help from the Stewart fortune. Then the invitation came. Your presence is requested at the 60th birthday celebration of David Stewart. My hand shook as I read it. After all this time, were they finally ready to make peace? I showed it to Zane, who squeezed my hand. It's your call, love, he said softly. But whatever you decide, we face it together. The night of the party, we dressed our best. I spent hours picking out the perfect gift, a rare first edition of my father's favorite business book, something that showed I still remembered, still cared. We walked into that familiar house, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. The room fell silent when we entered, just like that first dinner, but I pushed ahead. With trembling hands, I presented the carefully wrapped package to my father. He didn't even look at it. Just picked it up and tossed it aside like it was garbage, the beautiful paper crinkling as it landed among the other gifts. The dinner started like a perfectly choreographed show of cruelty. Every question, every comment was designed to wound. I watched in horror as my family took turns trying to break my husband's spirit. "So," Uncle George drawled, swirling his expensive wine, "still playing with your internet money, or have you found a real job yet?" Before Zane could answer, Aunt Patricia chimed in. "Dear, do you know which fork to use for the salad?" She giggled, nudging my cousin Rebecca. "These fancy dinners must be quite different from what you're used to." "That's quite a simple suit you're wearing," my mother observed with a smirk. "I suppose designer labels aren't in your budget?" "I wonder," Cousin Rebecca piped up, "have you ever even eaten truffle before tonight? They're quite expensive, you know." I watched Zane's face remain perfectly composed, even as they treated him like some sort of circus attraction. He'd built a successful life from nothing, earned every bit of respect he had in the tech world, and here they were, acting like he was beneath them because he didn't inherit his success. The breaking point came when my father raised his glass. "You know," he announced to the table, loud enough to silence everyone, "I always wondered what would happen to my daughter if she married beneath her station. Tell me, boy, does she miss her credit cards? Her shopping sprees? Or have you managed to save enough from your little computer games to keep her in the lifestyle she deserves?" Something snapped inside me. I stood up so fast, my chair toppled backward. "How dare you?" I was shaking with rage. "You sit here in your expensive clothes, in your massive house, acting like you're better than everyone else, when you're nothing but small, cruel people who've never earned a single thing in your lives." The room went dead silent. "You think wealth makes you worthy? Look at yourselves. You're all so busy showing off your money that you've forgotten how to be human beings." Dad's face turned purple. He stood up, matching my stance. "That's enough. I've had it with your ingratitude, your poor choices, your defensiveness, this fortune hunter." He turned to face the table, raising his voice even louder. "Let me make this absolutely clear, as of this moment, Abigail Stewart is no longer my daughter. She is disinherited, cut off completely." Then, with a theatrical flourish, he gestured to my cousin Michael, who'd been quietly preening at the other end of the table. "This is my new successor. My nephew, who understands the value of family tradition, of maintaining our standards." The relatives burst into applause as Michael stood, bowing slightly. "Thank you, Uncle David. I won't let you down like some people have." I looked around the table at these people I'd once called family. At my mother, clapping enthusiastically for my replacement. At my cousins, smirking with satisfaction. At my aunts and uncles, nodding approvingly at my public humiliation. "Come on, Zane," I said, taking my husband's hand. "We're done here. Permanently." The next few years passed like a whirlwind. Zane's cryptocurrency investments had been just the beginning. He used that capital to launch his own tech company, developing innovative AI solutions for businesses. Within 3 years, TechVision Enterprises was valued at over $500 million. The same internet money my father had mocked had transformed into an empire. I watched with pride as my husband's name began appearing in business magazines and tech journals. 30 Under 30, Most Innovative CEO, Tech Visionary of the Year, the accolades kept coming. But what made me proudest was how success hadn't changed him. He still opened doors for people, still remembered every employee's name, still wore simple clothes, though now they were tastefully expensive rather than cheap. I wanted to find my father and show him all these headlines. Show him how wrong he'd been. But we hadn't spoken since that disastrous birthday dinner, and honestly, I'd found peace in that silence. Then the invitation arrived. You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Rebecca Stewart. I stared at the thick cream envelope in disbelief. The same cousin who'd mocked Zane's table manners, who'd made snide comments about his clothes, was now inviting us to her wedding? Look what came in the mail, I said to Zane that evening, holding up the invitation. He read it carefully, then looked at me with those kind eyes I'd fallen in love with years ago. Maybe we should go. In my culture, we believe family is sacred, even when they hurt us. So there we were, walking into the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, where Rebecca's wedding was being held. The reaction was unexpected. Oh my God, is that Zane Hassan? The TechVision CEO? Did you see his interview in Tech Weekly? I heard he just closed a deal with Microsoft. Can I get a picture with you, Mr. Hassan? The same relatives who'd once looked down their noses at my poor immigrant husband were now falling over themselves to get his attention. Former critics were now eager fans, shoving business cards into his hands, asking for investment advice, begging for photos. I watched as Zane handled it all with characteristic grace, smiling for photos, answering questions politely, making everyone feel heard and respected, even those who'd never shown him the same courtesy. Your husband is absolutely brilliant, gushed Aunt Patricia, the same aunt who'd mocked his table manners years ago. Did you know he was featured in Forbes? I just smiled, thinking how funny life can be. The fortune hunter they'd accused him of being had built his own fortune, bigger than anything the Stewarts had ever imagined. But unlike them, he wore his success with humility and kindness. I should have known something was off when my parents made a beeline for our table. Mom was wearing her most ingratiating smile, the one she usually reserved for wealthy potential investors, while Dad had plastered on his best business face. Darling, Mom cooed, air-kissing my cheeks. And Zane? We'd been following your incredible success in the news. So proud to call you family. I couldn't help myself. Really? The same poor immigrant you couldn't bear to have at your table a few years ago? They flinched, but recovered quickly. Dad cleared his throat, loosening his collar, which, I noticed, wasn't from his usual luxury brand. Water under the bridge, sweetheart. Family is family, right? Then came the real reason for their sudden change of heart. Over the wedding appetizers, the story spilled out. Michael, their precious replacement heir, had nearly destroyed Stewart Pharmaceuticals. In his eagerness to cut costs, he'd signed contracts with shady suppliers. Now they were facing multiple lawsuits for selling counterfeit medications. The FDA is investigating, Dad said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The banks won't touch us. We're in trouble, princess. The legal fees alone. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. We've had to mortgage everything. Dad reached across the table, placing his hand over Zane's. Son, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you're family. And family helps family, right? We just need a loan to tide us over. A few million should do it. I saw Zane's face soften with sympathy. My husband, always so quick to forgive, was already reaching for his checkbook. I placed my hand over his, stopping him. Family helps family? I repeated, my voice ice cold. Funny, I remember you specifically saying we weren't family anymore. In fact, didn't you disown me? Twice? Now, Abigail, Dad's voice took on that warning tone from my childhood, after everything we've done for you. You taught me some valuable lessons, Dad, I cut him off. Like how not to give money to strangers. Isn't that what you always said? His face turned that familiar shade of purple. You ungrateful little. And about keeping high standards, I continued, my voice carrying just as the wedding DJ asked everyone to raise their glasses to the happy couple. So I'm sorry, but I don't associate with people who sell fake medications to sick people just to save a buck. Dad exploded, jumping to his feet. How dare you? After everything I've done for you. I raised you, educated you. And disowned me, I finished, standing calmly. Twice. Let's make it 3 times, you can disown me again if you'd like, but it won't change my answer. Taking Zane's hand, we walked out of the reception, my father's curses following us just like they had years ago. Only this time, I was smiling. That was 3 years ago. James keeps me updated on family news, not that I ask. The mighty Stewart Pharmaceuticals went bankrupt. The mansion where I grew up was sold at auction. Dad and Mom downsized to a condo, selling their luxury cars and Mom's precious jewelry to pay legal fees. Sometimes I think about that dinner years ago, when Dad called Zane a fortune hunter. Life has a funny way of showing us who people really are. My poor immigrant husband built an empire through hard work and integrity, while my respectable family lost everything through greed and shortcuts. But you know what? I learned that real wealth isn't about money at all. It's about having people in your life who stand by you when it matters, who lift you up instead of tearing you down. By that measure, I'm the richest woman in the world. I don't remember my mother's face. She died when I was 2, leaving just scattered photographs and Dad's stories to piece together who she was. My name is Kimberly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the truth is the only weapon you need against lies. Growing up in a politician's house meant getting used to empty spaces. Our mansion had 6 bedrooms, but most days it felt like I rattled around in there alone, like a marble in an empty box. Dad threw himself into his work after Mom died. For 2 years straight, he was just gone. Not physically, he still lived with us, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. "Your father's giving a speech tonight," Kimberly, my nanny, Sarah, would say, turning on the TV. "See? There he is." I'd press my little hands against the screen, trying to touch his face. That's how I usually saw him back then, through a glass barrier, talking to crowds of strangers instead of me. Thank God for Grandma Rose. She'd come over almost every day, bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies and stories about Dad when he was my age. I was 6 when everything changed. Dad came home one evening, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. "Kimberly, honey, I want you to meet someone special," he said. That's how Patricia entered our lives. My new stepmother was tall, perfectly put together, with this practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember standing there in my Pokemon pajamas, looking up at her, and feeling something off. The first few months weren't too bad. Patricia mostly ignored me, which was fine by me. I had my own wing of the house anyway, my bedroom, bathroom, and a little study area where I did my homework. Sarah stayed on as my nanny, and between her and Grandma Rose, I barely had to interact with Patricia at all. But I started noticing things. Like how Patricia's smile would drop the second Dad left the room. Or how she'd accidentally schedule her fancy lunch parties during my piano recitals, so Dad had to choose between them. He always chose her events, couldn't disappoint the wife of a rising political star, after all. "Don't take it personally, sweetie," Grandma Rose would tell me. "Your father's just busy. The campaign trail is demanding." I tried not to. Really, I did. But it's hard not to take it personally when you're watching your father's career updates on YouTube instead of having dinner with him. When your stepmother's shopping sprees get more attention than your straight A's. High school changed everything. Dad started talking about my future more, probably because his advisors told him education was a hot topic for voters. Whatever the reason, I wasn't complaining. For the first time in years, he seemed actually interested in my life. "Yale, Harvard, Stanford, take your pick, Kimmy," he said one evening, surprising me by actually being home for dinner. "With your grades, you could get into any of them. I'll cover everything, tuition, housing, whatever you need." I nearly choked on my pasta. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. Then came my 16th birthday. I walked outside that morning to find a brand new Mercedes in the driveway, complete with a massive red bow. Dad was standing there, grinning like a kid himself. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He dangled the keys in front of me. "Think you can handle it?" I screamed and hugged him so hard I probably wrinkled his $1,000 suit. For a moment, I felt like I had my old dad back, the one from before Mom died, before politics ate his life. Patricia's voice cut through my joy like ice. A Mercedes? Really, Richard? For a 16-year-old? I could practically feel her glaring at my back as Dad showed me the car's features. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. You're turning her into exactly what the opposition accuses us of representing, privileged, entitled rich kids. Patricia's voice carried through the walls. What's next? A private jet for graduation? She's my daughter, Patricia. I've missed too many birthdays already. And how will it look when she wraps that car around a tree? Or when her spoiled little friends get her into drugs? Have you thought about your campaign? After that, Patricia made it her mission to save me from myself, as she put it. Every time Dad mentioned college plans, she'd bring up some article about trust fund kids going wild at university. When I needed money for school supplies, she'd question every penny. Kimberly, dear, she'd say in that sugary voice she used when her country club friends were over, do tell everyone about that C you got in chemistry. Such a shame, especially with all the resources your father provides. Meanwhile, her own credit card bills were astronomical. I'm so lonely when Richard's away, she'd pout to Dad. Shopping is my only comfort. Another $5,000 handbag. Another spa weekend. Another renovation project. I tried staying out of it. Really, I did. But Patricia wouldn't let me. Your father works so hard, she'd say loudly when her friends visited, and some people just take without any gratitude. She'd look right at me while saying it. One day, I finally snapped. It was during one of her lunch parties. She'd been making little digs at me all afternoon, and I just couldn't take it anymore. At least I'm not the one bleeding him dry with shopping sprees, I shot back. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. That evening, Dad called me into his study. Patricia tells me you embarrassed her in front of her friends today. Kimberly, you need to try harder. She's doing her best to be a mother to you. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and went to my room. After that, I became a ghost in my own house. I took my meals in my room, timing my kitchen raids for when Patricia was out. I studied harder than ever, determined to get into a college far away from her. The only time I had to see her was when Dad was home, and then I'd play my part in our little family theater production. Winter break couldn't come fast enough that year. My friends had planned a snowboarding trip to Mountain Ridge Resort, and surprisingly, Patricia agreed when I asked permission. Dad was away on some campaign tour, as usual. Here's money for the trip, Patricia said, holding out several $100 bills. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. But remember, Kimberly, no showing off. We don't need stories about the politician's spoiled daughter making a scene at a ski resort. The morning we left, the sky was perfect, crystal clear blue, with fresh powder on the slopes. I'd been snowboarding at Mountain Ridge since I was 13, and the familiar rush of excitement filled me as we pulled into the parking lot. The first few runs were perfect. The wind in my face, the spray of snow, the absolute freedom, this was my happy place. No Patricia, no political drama, just me and the mountain. Then it happened. I still replay that moment in my head sometimes. I was on my favorite trail, coming down at a good clip. I'd done this run dozens of times before. But somehow, maybe I caught an edge, maybe I was going too fast, everything went wrong in an instant. The world spun. Sky, snow, sky, snow. I felt myself rolling, tumbling, my body hitting the slope again and again. There was pain, sharp and overwhelming, and then everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing and people shouting in the distance. Don't move. Someone was kneeling beside me. The ski patrol is coming. The pain in my legs was excruciating. Through the haze, I heard words like multiple fractures and emergency transport. In the ambulance, once they'd given me something for the pain, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Dad would know what to do. Dad would help. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. With growing desperation, I called Patricia. "What?" her sharp voice answered. "Patricia, there's been an accident." "I'm in an ambulance." "Of course there has." Her voice turned venomous. "You worthless little drunk. I knew you'd pull something like this. Stealing money wasn't enough, now you have to embarrass your father with a drunken accident?" "What? I wasn't drinking. I just fell." "Save your lies for someone else, you little thief. Don't bother calling again." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in shock, tears streaming down my face. Thief? Drunk? What was she talking about? "Miss, we're almost at the hospital," the paramedic said gently. "Is there someone else we can call for you?" I nodded numbly, giving them Grandma Rose's number. My legs throbbed with every bump in the road, but somehow the pain in my chest hurt worse. Hours passed in a blur of x-rays, doctors, and morphine. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Dad to call back. He had to have gotten my messages by now. He had to know I was hurt. But no call came. The nurses were kind, bringing me extra blankets and Jell-O cups. But as night fell and I lay there alone in the sterile hospital room, listening to the beeping of machines, I felt more abandoned than I ever had in my life. I woke up to sunshine streaming through the hospital window and the familiar scent of Grandma Rose's perfume. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt okay. Then I saw her face. Grandma Rose looked older than I'd ever seen her, her usual warm smile replaced by something pained and worried. She was wringing her hands, something she only did when things were really bad. "Grandma, what's wrong? Is Dad coming?" She sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "Oh, Kimberly, your father called me last night. He's very angry, sweetheart. He says you put his whole campaign at risk." "What? How?" "He says," she paused, looking like each word hurt her. "He says you stole money from the house. That you were drinking with your friends on the mountain, got into some kind of fight, and then fell while intoxicated." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "That's not true. None of that is true. I was just snowboarding, you know I've done it 100 times before." "I know, honey, I know," she reached for my hand. "But your father, he wants you to come stay with me after you're released. He says he's too disappointed to see you right now." The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. My own father thought I was a drunk thief? He wouldn't even come see me in the hospital? "But Grandma, you know me. You know I wouldn't." "Of course I know, sweetheart." She squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out. We always do." I spent the next few hours trying to process everything. My legs ached, but the pain in my heart was worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's face from my 16th birthday, proud and smiling. How had everything gone so wrong? Then the door opened, and Patricia walked in. A nurse was checking my drip, and Patricia put on quite a show. "Oh, you poor dear," she cooed, patting my hand. "This must be so difficult for you." The nurse smiled approvingly at my stepmother's apparent concern. "She's lucky to have such a caring family," she said, making some notes on my chart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the nurse that this woman was the reason my own father wouldn't come see me. But I just lay there, watching Patricia play her part. As soon as the nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, something in my gut told me to reach for my phone. I'd learned long ago to trust those instincts when it came to Patricia. Quietly, I started the voice recorder. Just in time. Patricia's face transformed into something ugly and triumphant. She perched on the edge of my bed, enjoying my discomfort as I tried to shift away. "Oh, Kimberly," she practically purred. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." "What are you talking about?" She laughed, not her usual polite titter, but a harsh, cruel sound. "You really are slow, aren't you? Let me spell it out for you. Daddy dearest thinks his precious little girl is a drunk and a thief." My throat went dry. You told him that?" Of course I did. And the best part? She leaned in closer, her expensive perfume making me nauseous. He believed every word. That you stole thousands from his safe, money that's actually sitting quite nicely in my private account, by the way. That you were drinking and fighting on that mountain before your little accident. He'll never believe. He already has. She was practically gloating now. Your father won't be paying for any fancy colleges now. No more trust fund, no more inheritance. I've made sure of that. Soon, I'll be his sole heir, exactly as it should be. I felt the walls closing in. Why? Why are you doing this? Because you're in my way. Always have been. His precious little reminder of his first wife. She stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. But now you're just the family disappointment. The drunk, crippled daughter he'd rather forget. Tears were streaming down my face now. I'll get better, the doctor said. Please, she waved her hand dismissively. You'll be lucky if you ever walk normally again. Not that it matters, you won't need that fancy car of yours anymore. I'll be taking that off your hands. After all, what use does a disabled person have for a Mercedes? She walked to the door, then turned back with a smile that chilled me to my bones. Face it, Kimberly. You're all alone now. No money, no father, no future. Just you and your dear old grandmother, struggling to get by. Exactly where you belong. The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. I played back the recording, her venomous words, now preserved forever in digital form. My fingers hovered over the phone screen as I contemplated what to do with this evidence. After I was discharged from the hospital, I did not return to my parents' place. Grandma Rose's house wasn't huge like my father's mansion, but it had something our old house never had: warmth. Real warmth, the kind that comes from love, not central heating. Recovery was hell. Physical therapy 3 times a week, endless exercises, learning to walk again step by excruciating step. Grandma Rose was there through all of it, holding my hand when the pain got too bad, celebrating every tiny victory. Between therapy sessions, I threw myself into my studies. My laptop became my classroom, video lectures, online assignments, virtual study groups. Some days I could barely get out of bed, but I still logged on, determined not to let Patricia's predictions about my future come true. Then came graduation time. I'd managed to keep my grades up despite everything, and the acceptance letters started arriving. Yale, Columbia, Berkeley. Each one a dream school, each one completely out of reach. With shaking hands, I dialed Dad's number. It had been a year since the accident, since he'd abandoned me. Maybe now. Dad? My voice sounded small, even to myself. Kimberly, cold, formal, a politician's voice. I told you not to call. Please, just listen. I got into Yale. I'm not paying for college for a thief and a drunk. Don't call this number again. Click. I sat there, phone in hand, the recording from the hospital burning a hole in my pocket. I could have played it for him. Could have exposed Patricia's lies right then and there. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe. Or maybe it was the realization that a father who could believe those lies so easily, who could abandon his injured daughter without even hearing her side, maybe he didn't deserve the truth. I'll find another way, I told Grandma that night. And I did. I got a job as a barista, then picked up evening shifts at a bookstore. I learned to tune out the news when Dad's face appeared on TV, campaigning for his next big position. I stopped flinching when customers mentioned his name, stopped caring when they talked about what a family man he was. 3 years passed like that. Wake up, go to work, study in between shifts, save every penny. Grandma Rose helped as much as she could, even trying to sell her antique jewelry at one point. I wouldn't let her. You should be proud of yourself, she told me one evening as I counted my savings. I was about halfway to my goal. I realized. And I was. The girl who'd lived in that mansion, who'd driven that Mercedes, who'd waited desperately for her father's attention, she was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who didn't need his approval or his money. I was wiping down tables at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Usually, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Kimberly, darling, that honey-sweet voice. Patricia. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you want? Now, is that any way to talk to your loving stepmother? She laughed that fake laugh I remembered so well. Especially when I'm calling with such an opportunity for you. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. Oh, but you will be. Your father's campaign is ramping up again. His image team has this brilliant idea, focusing on family values. They want to do a series of interviews with you. I almost laughed. You can't be serious. Very serious. You'll talk about what a wonderful father Richard is, how supportive he's been. How close we all are as a family. The loving daughter, reunited with her devoted father and stepmother. The public will eat it up. The sheer audacity of it struck me speechless for a moment. 3 years of silence, of struggling, of rebuilding my life from scratch, and now they wanted me to play happy families? You're insane, I finally managed. Why would I ever help you? Her voice turned sharp. Because if you don't, you can forget about any inheritance. And don't forget, your father can still press charges for that money you stole. I never stole anything. You took that money. Your word against mine, dear. Who do you think people will believe? The respected politician's wife or the troubled, alcoholic daughter? Something snapped inside me. All these years of swallowing her lies, of taking the high road, for what? Go to hell, Patricia. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I sat at my tiny desk in Grandma's house. My laptop hummed to life. The audio files were right where I'd kept them all this time, Patricia's hospital room confession, and now this latest call too. 3 years ago, I'd chosen silence. Chose to walk away and rebuild on my own terms. But enough was enough. I opened my social media accounts. Started typing. For 3 years, I've stayed quiet about what really happened. I attached the audio files. Added screenshots of Patricia's threatening messages. Everything. My finger hovered over the post button. This would change everything, not just for Patricia and Dad, but for me too. No going back after this. I pressed post. I had no idea what I'd started. Within hours, my post went viral. By morning, it was everywhere, news sites, political blogs, social media. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters and TV producers. We'd love to have you tell your story on our morning show, they'd say. Or, this could really damage your father's campaign. Care to comment? I turned them all down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Watching his polling numbers plummet didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. If anything, it made me feel hollow. Then, exactly 1 week after the post, my phone rang. Dad's number. Can we meet? He asked. His voice sounded different, tired, human. Please? We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop, not the one where I worked, but a quiet place across town. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished politician in his perfect suit. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, his tie loose, his shoulders slumped. Kimberly, he said, standing up. I don't even know where to start. The beginning might be good, I said, sitting down. He took a deep breath. I heard the recordings. All of them. I'd been listening to them over and over, trying to understand how I could have been so blind. His voice cracked. I failed you. Not just after the accident, but for years before that. I was so focused on my career, on building this perfect political image, that I forgot what really mattered. Tears were streaming down his face now. I'd never seen my father cry before. Patricia confessed everything, he continued. The stolen money, the lies about you drinking, how she manipulated the whole situation after your accident. She admitted she'd been trying to drive us apart for years. He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. Can you ever forgive me? I started crying too. I missed you, Dad, so much. We stood up and hugged, right there in the middle of the coffee shop. 3 years of pain and separation dissolved in that embrace. I've filed for divorce, he told me later. The lawyers are handling it. And I want to pay for your college, any school you want. It's the least I can do. Yale's still my dream school, I admitted. Then Yale it is. That evening, I made another post. This time, I told the whole story, not just Patricia's manipulation, but also how my father had owned his mistakes and chosen to make things right. To my surprise, people loved it. The story of a politician choosing his daughter over his image, admitting his failures, and working to make amends resonated with voters in a way no carefully crafted campaign message ever could. 2 months later, I moved into my dorm at Yale. Dad helped me carry my boxes up, just like any other father would. Grandma Rose cried happy tears as she made my bed with fresh sheets. Patricia? Last I heard, she was living off her divorce settlement somewhere in Florida. Sometimes I think about sending her a thank you note. After all, her final power play was what ultimately brought my father and me back together. But mostly, I think about how healing isn't always quiet or private. Sometimes it takes a public explosion to clear the way for something better to grow. Sometimes you have to break everything down to build it back up right. As for me, I'm majoring in political science. Ironic, I know. But I figure someone needs to show the world that politics and truth aren't always enemies. And Dad? He won his next election. Turns out, people prefer real humanity over perfect facades anyway. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that sometimes, the truth does more than that. Sometimes, it brings you home. Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Chicago, my life was pretty straightforward. My dad, Tom, spent 30 years on the police force before retiring, and my mom, Sarah, still works as a secretary at Lincoln Elementary. They gave me everything they could, but we were never wealthy. I'm Tasha Mitchell. Well, I was before I became Tasha Reynolds. After graduating from college with an accounting degree, I landed a job at Anderson & Partners, a mid-sized accounting firm. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and I thought that would be my life. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. Then came that rainy Tuesday in October when I literally bumped into Marcus outside Starbucks. I was rushing to get my morning coffee before work, and he was heading to some important meeting. My coffee spilled all over his obviously expensive suit, and I wanted to die right there. I'm so sorry, I started dabbing at his jacket with napkins. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear. Instead of getting angry, he laughed. Don't worry about it. Though you could make it up to me by having dinner with me tonight. That dinner turned into another, and another. Marcus was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was the son of James and Victoria Reynolds, owners of Reynolds Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest. But he never made me feel less than him. He loved that I came from a real family, as he called it. That all changed when he took me to meet his parents at their mansion in Lake Forest. I'll never forget Victoria Reynolds looking me up and down like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. So, Tasha, she said, swirling her wine glass, Marcus tells us you're an accountant? Yes, I am, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. How practical, she said with a thin smile. And your parents? When I told her about my dad being a retired cop and my mom a school secretary, you'd think I'd said they were professional criminals. James Reynolds barely looked at me during dinner, speaking only to Marcus about work. When he proposed 3 months later, I said yes without hesitation. His parents attended our wedding with frozen smiles and stiff congratulations. I thought I could win them over with time. I thought love would be enough. After our honeymoon in Bali, Marcus and I moved into his luxury apartment in downtown Chicago. The place was bigger than my parents' entire house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I felt like I was living in a dream. 2 months after we married, I discovered I was pregnant. Marcus was ecstatic, spinning me around our massive living room when I told him. Even Victoria and James seemed to soften a little at the news, though Victoria couldn't resist saying, "Well, at least the child will have good breeding on one side." Our son, James Jr., Marcus insisted on naming him after his father, was born on a snowy December morning. The moment I held him, nothing else mattered, not Victoria's constant criticisms, not the whispers at Reynolds Industries parties about the accountant who married the boss's son. JJ, as we called him, was perfect. Those first 2 years were actually good. Marcus took to fatherhood like a natural, coming home early to play with JJ, reading him bedtime stories, taking us both to the park on weekends. He was thriving as financial director at Reynolds Industries, and I worked part-time from home as an accountant while taking care of JJ and our home. Victoria and James might not have liked me, but they doted on their grandson, showering him with expensive gifts and demanding regular visits. But somewhere around JJ's 3rd birthday, things started to change. Marcus began coming home later and later, always with the same excuse, "Big project at work, honey." You wouldn't understand. The man who used to rush home to see his son now barely made it for bedtime. Then came that Thursday when Victoria showed up unannounced at our apartment, her Hermes scarf perfectly arranged, despite the wind outside. "Would you care to explain," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, "why you weren't at the company's annual gala last night?" I stared at her, confused. "What gala?" "Don't play dumb, Tasha." "The Reynolds Industries anniversary gala. Every executive and their wife was there, except you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know about any gala. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Marcus said you weren't feeling well." "Are you telling me my son lied?" I waited up that night, sitting in our dark living room until Marcus came home at 11:30. He loosened his tie as he walked in, stopping short when he saw me. "Why didn't you tell me about the gala?" I asked quietly. He sighed, pouring himself a scotch. "Look, Tasha, let's be honest. You wouldn't have fit in. You're too simple for these events. The other executives' wives, they know how to carry themselves. They can discuss art and wine and summer homes in the Hamptons. What would you talk about? Your dad's police stories? Your mom's adventures in the school cafeteria?" I felt like he'd slapped me. "I'm your wife, Marcus. You're supposed to be proud of me, not ashamed." I was proud, Tasha. When we were dating, your simplicity was charming. But I'm the financial director now. I need a wife who can be more. I went to bed crying that night, telling myself he was just stressed from work, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be fixed. It was a Tuesday when my world fell apart. Marcus had texted that he was working late again, and I was doing my usual cleaning routine around the apartment. When I got to his home office, I noticed his laptop was open on his desk, screen still bright. I'd never snooped before, I trusted him, despite everything. But something made me pause this time. Maybe it was the way the screen showed his email was open, or maybe I was just tired of all the lies. I sat down at his desk, and that's when I saw it, an email thread with someone named Sophia Loran. My hand shook as I started reading. There were hundreds of messages between them, going back months. Sophia was apparently a new marketing executive at Reynolds Industries, hired about a year ago. As I scrolled through their correspondence, my stomach turned. "Had dinner with the village idiot again," Marcus had written. "God, I can't believe I have to go home to her." Sophia's response, "Poor baby. Don't worry, I'll make it all better tomorrow." They talked about me like I was a joke, the simple-minded wife who didn't know her husband was sleeping with someone else. There were pictures of jewelry he'd bought her, weekend trips they'd taken while he'd told me he was at business conferences. I stayed up all night, copying everything to a USB drive, printing key emails, taking screenshots. When Marcus finally came home at 7 a.m., his shirt wrinkled and his tie loose, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the evidence spread out in front of me. "Care to explain?" I asked, holding up one of the printed emails. "How could you do this to me, to our family?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Come on, Tasha. Did you really think you were enough? Sophia is everything you're not: sophisticated, sexy, exciting. When's the last time you even tried to look good for me? I've been taking care of our son while you've been screwing around." "Look," he said, pouring himself a coffee like we were discussing the weather, "here's how this is going to work. You'll stay my wife, on paper. It's better for my image at the company. Sophia understands. And hey," he added with a nasty grin, "maybe I'll even find time for you occasionally. If you're lucky." I ran to JJ's room, my hands shaking as I threw some clothes into a backpack. JJ was still sleeping, clutching his favorite teddy bear. I gently woke him up. "Baby, we're going to visit Grandma and Grandpa for a while, okay?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching us. "You'll be back. Where else could you possibly go?" I picked up my son, grabbed the backpack and my purse with the USB drive, and walked past Marcus without a word. Through tears, I drove to my parents' house. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. The divorce papers arrived 3 days after I left. Victoria Reynolds personally delivered them to my parents' front door, wearing a satisfied smirk. "I always knew you weren't good enough for my son," she said, handing me the envelope. I'm just glad he finally realized it too. But what came next was worse than anything I'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just filing for divorce, he was suing for full custody of JJ. His lawyer filed papers claiming I was an unfit mother, painting a picture of me that was completely false. "Your Honor," Marcus's expensive lawyer said during our first hearing, "Mrs. Reynolds has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. She drinks heavily, creates scenes of jealousy without cause, and has become unstable." Thank God I'd saved all that evidence. When my lawyer presented the email correspondence between Marcus and Sophia, showing his infidelity and his cruel comments about me, the judge's expression changed. The timestamps on the emails proved I hadn't been creating scenes. I hadn't even known about the affair until I found those messages. "So, Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, reviewing the evidence, "you claim your wife is unstable, yet these emails show you were the one deceiving her, gaslighting her?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit. The judge awarded me primary custody of JJ, with Marcus getting every other weekend and substantial child support payments. I went back to work full-time at my accounting firm, while Mom and Dad helped with JJ. They were amazing, turning their retirement years into full-time grandparent duty without a single complaint. We settled into a routine. It wasn't luxury living anymore, but it was honest and peaceful. Then came that Saturday morning when a black Range Rover pulled up in front of my parents' modest house. Marcus stepped out, and with him was Sophia, tall, blonde, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "I'm here to see my son," Marcus announced, pushing past me into the house. Sophia followed, her nose wrinkled as she looked around our living room with its worn but comfortable furniture. "Oh my God," she laughed, picking up one of Mom's cherished family photos. "This place is literally a dump. Like an actual kennel." "Watch your mouth," I warned her. She turned to Marcus. "Baby, you can't let your son stay in this hovel. And these old people?" She gestured toward my parents, who stood shocked in the doorway. "They belong in a ditch somewhere, not raising a Reynolds heir." "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my parents' house right now." "Or what?" Marcus sneered. "You know what, Tasha? I'm done playing nice. I'm going to take JJ, and I'm going to destroy you. You think you won in court? Just wait." I shoved them both toward the door. "Get out." Come on, baby, Sophia purred to Marcus. This place probably has fleas anyway. As they drove away, I hugged my parents tight. Mom was crying, and Dad looked like he wanted to punch something. But watching that Range Rover disappear down our street, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. The next night, Dad found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. You know, sweetheart, he said, sitting down across from me, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Remember Mike Sullivan? He worked with me on the force. Now he's a private investigator. Real thorough guy, knows how to dig deep without leaving traces. I thought about Sophia's smug face, about her cruel words about my parents, about all the nasty emails she kept sending me. Just that morning, she'd commented on my LinkedIn profile photo, "Look at this pathetic wannabe. Can't even afford decent clothes anymore?" Marcus wasn't any better. His latest email had read, "Every time I pick up JJ and see you in that dump, I remember why I upgraded. Enjoy playing poor with your cop daddy." How much does Mike charge? I asked Dad. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small office downtown with Mike Sullivan, a gruff man with kind eyes who'd known me since I was a kid. Weeks passed. I focused on work and JJ, trying to ignore the constant stream of harassment from Marcus and Sophia. Then Mike called. "You need to come to my office," he said. "You're going to want to see this in person." The file he handed me was thick. "First off," he said, "Sophia Loren isn't her real name. She's using her sister's identity. Her real name is Carla Larson." As I read through the file, my hands started shaking. Before working at Reynolds Industries, Sophia had been an escort, moving from rich man to rich man, living off their money until they got tired of her or discovered her small-time scams. She'd had different names in different cities, always disappearing just before things got too hot. But what she was doing at Reynolds Industries was far worse. "Look at these bank transfers," Mike pointed out. "She's been siphoning money from company accounts, small amounts that wouldn't raise red flags. And these emails?" He showed me screenshots. "She's been selling company information to your in-laws' biggest competitors. Product launches, merger plans, everything." I sat back, my mind racing. The perfect, sophisticated Sophia Loren was nothing but a con artist. And she'd gotten her hooks into not just my husband, but the entire Reynolds empire. "There's one more thing," Mike said, pulling out another folder. "Remember that big deal Reynolds Industries lost last month? The one that cost them millions? Sophia sold the bid information to their competitor 3 days before the deadline." I gathered all the evidence carefully, making multiple copies. But I didn't make a move. Not yet. Because now I knew something Sophia didn't. Timing is everything. The call from Victoria came on a Wednesday morning. Her voice was as cold as ever. "Tasha, James's 60th birthday party is this Saturday," she said, like she was scheduling a root canal. "While we'd prefer to keep this a family-only affair, JJ should be there for his grandfather's birthday. And since he's too young to come alone." She let the sentence hang there. "Just remember, you're only being invited as JJ's escort. Try to stay in the background and not embarrass anyone. The party starts at 7. James Reynolds' 60th birthday party was exactly as ostentatious as you'd expect. The mansion was decked out in gold and crystal, with waiters carrying champagne on silver trays. I felt every judgmental stare as JJ and I walked in. "Oh, you came," Victoria said, her smile tight. "Well, JJ darling, come give grandmother a kiss." I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table, watching my son being paraded around like a show pony. The other guests either ignored me or whispered behind their hands. I clutched my large purse containing Mike's file, waiting. Then Marcus walked in with Sophia on his arm. She was wearing a red Valentino dress that probably cost more than my car, diamonds dripping from her ears. "Everyone," Marcus announced, clinking his glass. "I have an announcement to make." He pulled Sophia closer. "I'd like you all to meet my future wife, Sophia Loren." She'll be joining the Reynolds family officially next spring. Victoria rushed forward to embrace her. Finally, a woman worthy of the Reynolds name. Harvard educated, from a wonderful family. Unlike some people, James added, shooting me a look. Sophia preened under their attention. I just feel so blessed to be joining such an esteemed family. And I promise to be the kind of wife Marcus truly deserves. That was my cue. I stood up, my hand steady as I pulled out the file. Speaking of what people deserve, I said loudly, I have a few things to share about the future Mrs. Reynolds. Tasha, Marcus warned, don't make a scene. I pulled out the first document. Tell me, Sophia, or should I say Carla Larson? How's your sister feeling about you stealing her identity? The color drained from Sophia's face. What is she talking about? Victoria demanded. Oh, did she not mention that she's been living under her sister's identity? The real Sophia Loren is a schoolteacher in Minnesota. This woman, I pointed at her, is Carla Larson, former escort and con artist. She's lying, Sophia shrieked, but I was already laying out the evidence, photos, bank statements, police reports. And here's my personal favorite, I continued, pulling out more documents. Bank transfers showing how she's been stealing from Reynolds Industries. And look at these emails, she's been selling your company's secrets to Wagner Manufacturing and Collins Corp for months. James Reynolds snatched the papers from my hands. The Wagner deal, the Collins merger, it was you? I can explain, Sophia stammered, backing away from Marcus's thunderous face. The real Carla Larson, I said, enjoying every moment, has quite a history. 7 different cities, 7 different wealthy men, 7 different scams. Looks like Reynolds Industries was going to be number 8. The room had gone deadly quiet. I watched their faces change as they read through the evidence, Marcus's confusion, Victoria's horror, James's growing rage. And Sophia, her perfect mask cracking as her house of cards came tumbling down. The elegant birthday party dissolved into chaos within minutes. James Reynolds's face had turned an alarming shade of purple as he read through the evidence. Get out, he roared at Sophia, who was still trying to stammer excuses. Get out of my house before I have you arrested right here. James, darling, she attempted, reaching for his arm. These are all lies, I can explain everything. Explain? He shook the documents at her. Explain how you cost us the Wagner deal? That contract was worth $20 million. And Collins? They were our biggest competitor, and you've been feeding them everything. Victoria, who'd been quietly reading through the escort service records, looked up with pure venom in her eyes. You common prostitute, she hissed. You thought you could con your way into our family? Sophia backed toward the door, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. Marcus, baby, tell them. But Marcus looked like he might be sick, staring at the photos of Sophia, or Sophie, with various wealthy men over the years. If you're not off my property in 30 seconds, James said, his voice deadly quiet, I'm calling the police. And trust me, you'll be seeing plenty of our lawyers either way. After Sophia fled, James turned to his son. The party guests were pretending to be absorbed in their champagne, but everyone was watching. You brought this woman into our company, James said. Gave her access to confidential information. All because what? She was pretty? Had nice legs? Dad, I didn't know. Exactly, James roared. You didn't know. Didn't check. Just thought with your, he glanced at JJ and modified his language, with everything except your brain. You're fired, Marcus. Clear out your office by tomorrow. But Dad. And that apartment you're living in? Company property. Find somewhere else to live. Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly turned to me. Tasha, she said, and for the first time ever, her voice held genuine emotion. We owe you an apology. A significant one. You saved our company from God knows how much damage. James nodded solemnly. We were wrong about you. Very wrong. You've proven yourself more worthy of the Reynolds name than He glanced at Marcus, others. 3 days later, Sophia was arrested at O'Hare, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with what Reynolds Industries lawyers found once they started looking, was overwhelming. She was facing serious fraud charges and massive fines. Marcus, I heard, was staying at a friend's condo while he looked for a new job. No other financial firms were eager to hire a man who'd been fired for such catastrophic negligence. It's been 6 months since James Reynolds' birthday party changed everything. I'm sitting in my new apartment, not as luxurious as the one I shared with Marcus, but perfect for JJ and me. The Reynolds family gave it to me as a token of appreciation for saving their company from Sophia's schemes. The least we could do, James had said, handing me the keys. After everything, well, you understand. The apartment is in a nice neighborhood, close to good schools. JJ's room is decorated with superhero posters, and my little home office overlooks a park. It's not a penthouse with lake views, but it feels like home in a way the luxury apartment never did. Marcus moved to California last month. He calls JJ every Sunday at 7 p.m., like clockwork. Their conversations are short. JJ's still too young to talk long on the phone, but at least he's trying to be a father, even from a distance. He never asks to speak to me, and that's fine. Some bridges stay burned. The biggest change has been with the Reynolds family. Victoria stops by at least once a week, usually bearing gifts for JJ and, surprisingly, for me too. Last week, she brought a beautiful orchid for my windowsill. The real shock came when Victoria and James invited my parents over for dinner. I was nervous. The last time they'd all been in the same room was at my wedding, where the class divide had been palpable. But something had shifted. I watched in amazement as James asked Dad about his years on the force, genuinely interested in his stories. Victoria and Mom talked about gardening, exchanging tips about growing roses. Sarah, Victoria said to my mom at the end of the evening, "You and Tom raised a remarkable daughter." I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. We always knew what Tasha was capable of, Mom replied with quiet dignity. Sometimes it just takes others a while to catch up. Life isn't perfect. I still have days when I miss the man I thought Marcus was, when I worry about JJ growing up with a long-distance father. But then I look at my son, happy and healthy, playing with his grandparents, all his grandparents, and I know we're going to be okay. Last night, I found JJ looking at an old photo of Marcus and me from our wedding day. "Do you miss Daddy?" he asked. I sat down next to him, pulling him close. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But you know what? Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it goes wrong before it goes right. The important thing is to stay true to who you are." Later, as I tucked him into bed, I thought about how far we'd come. From the simple accountant the Reynolds family once scorned, to the woman who saved their company. Sometimes the happy ending isn't the one you expected. Sometimes it's better.